I will begin softly, because that is how the forest first speaks through breath and dew, and the hush that gathers before a name is given. Step closer to the firelight, and I will sit just beyond the rim of it, where my eyes can keep their night. We are in Seeonee, before the droughts you may have heard of, before the red dogs, before the boy learned the cruel arithmetic of men. The moon is a curved claw. The bees have turned in. Even the bandalogs sleep, which is to say, they chatter in their dreams. This is the hour when young wolves listen best. When I say we, I mean the free people. And when I say I mean the brother who ran a half-pace behind the boy who was not born to pads and paws. Let me tell you how he came to us, and how, in the space of a few heartbeats, the law bent not to break, but to cradle. It was mother's den first, our den ringed with roots that clutched the hill like an elder's fingers. The air was milk-warm, smelling of damp fern and the sleep of cubs. I had dozed with my brothers and sisters, tangled like river grass when the thorn bush rustled wrong. Not fear, not yet. A wrongness like the cough of a great engine far away, and then the sour scorch of tiger. Shere Khan, lame in one shoulder, blundered and complained down the hillside. His hunger was a drum. With him came a smaller smell, thin and new, a raw thread of human smoke, iron, something bright and frightened. Mother lifted her head, father's hackles rose. The stranger scrambled to our lip of stone. He was no bigger than a half-grown jackal, naked as a fledgling bird, with the unsteady courage of anything that has not yet learned to be ashamed. I remember the pale blink of his eyes, the quick hands that found the warmth between mother's paws, as if that place had always belonged to him. Shere Khan bellowed at the mouth of our cave for his meat. He demanded, he threatened. Mother stood. You have heard it sung how Raksha named herself demon when she swore the boy was hers. I was there. The words were not thunder for me. They were a loom, throwing warp over weft, weaving us into a story that would hold when it was tugged. We took the man-cub to Council Rock at moonrise. If you have never seen the council, imagine a basin of stone where all paths flow together, and in the middle a patient boulder that has outlived even the rains. Akela stood upon it, tall and grey and alone in the way leaders are. Around him, in rings that shone and shadowed with the moon, the pack gathered. There were noses I trusted and eyes I did not, and those who always smell of yesterday's kill. The law is simple as water when it runs. Every cub must be shown, so the pack may know it, and guard it as its own. But this was no ordinary showing. This was a cub with the smell of man. This was a taste the law had not felt on its tongue in many seasons. Akela's voice flowed over us, low and even. He asked who would speak for the man-cub. The vines hissed as a body moved through them. Bagheera, the black that is not merely night, but the idea of it, glided into the ring. He did not waste words. He clapped the ground with one paw, as a butcher marks a slab, and offered a price. A bull he had killed at dawn. Meat is a language the pack understands. I remember how the word bull lifted heads along the farther ring, how the thought of a full belly calmed the fur that had bristled at the boy's smell. The law allows adoption upon ransom, and Bagheera knows how to lean on a custom until it yields. Yet the pack is not only bone and belly. There are wolves who listen to the quiet between the leaves. Baloo, the sleepy, scratch-proud teacher of cubs, lumbered in and rumbled that he would take the boy as a pupil, that the law would not be mocked. And then there was Mother Raksha, whose eyes were moons inside the moon. She lifted her muzzle and said the name she had chosen, Mowgli, Little Frog. The sound of it slipped out and returned to us from the cliff sides, timid at first, then sure. I did not speak that night. I was only Grey Brother, quick to run errands, quicker still to learn what can be learned by keeping your mouth closed. But I watched. The way Akela's weight shifted as he measured the hunger of his pack against the hunger of the tiger waiting in the ravine. The way the oldest wolves tilted their ears when Bagheera's tail tip wrote a silent sentence in the dust. The way Mowgli yawned not in fear, not in bravado, simply because cubs yawn when the night grows long, and how that ordinary yawn undid something knotted in my chest. If you have ever held a door for a neighbour you barely know and found without reason that your day becomes easier, then you know a little of the untying I mean. Shere Khan was not present in the ring, though his absence bellowed as much as any challenge. But the pack is not a court that calls witnesses. It is a memory that votes with its feet and stomach. When the voices turned, some lured by Bagheera's bull, some by Baloo's promise, some by the mere gentleness of Mother's stance, a new shadow entered the council. It was the shape of an oath we could not yet see. I stepped closer to my brother then, and he reached, clumsy-fingered, for my ear and tugged it as if it were a vine. The touch surprised me. It did not feel like trespass. It felt like weather, like a breeze that proves a change but does not ask permission. If you are thinking that wolves do not weigh such things, that we move in the straight line of hunger and packcraft, you have not listened to the long stories told under lean moons. We know the cost of a choice that seems easy because it is convenient. We know that a full belly can make a bad law feel almost good. In the ring that night, the law leaned toward mercy and also toward meat, and we pretended not to mind the knot where those two cords rubbed. I tell you frankly, I was proud, a pride that broke into a trot inside me, as if my paws had found a slope I had always wanted to run. To belong is an uphill muscle. To let someone belong beside you is the steeper climb. Mowgli became ours. The word settled like warm sand between ribs. The ring dissolved. Wolves went to the kill that Bagheera had paid for. Baloo snorted, shaking ants from his fur, already thinking of the first lesson he would give. Akela stepped down, older by a whisker, for having done nothing more than stand still in a storm. On the way back to our cave, the forest was a basket holding many new weights. Mowgli toddled, then burst forward, then stopped to examine a beetle with religious attention. He laughed once, high, foolish. Free and Father, who laughs rarely, made a small noise in his throat that might have been the same thing. Mother kept her tail high, which is our banner of victory and also of warning. I trotted circles, measuring every scent, every murmur, mapping how danger would now be drawn to us because of the human thread woven into our fur. Adoption, in the forest as in your towns, is never only sweetness. It is a new war kindly disguised. We curled again in the den. The moon brushed our doorway like a quiet inspector. The boy's breath warmed my foreleg. Raksha sang not a song you would know. but one that long nights will teach a mother to tell the jungle that what was taken in fear must now be guarded in love. If you have ever put a strange key on your ring and found by dawn that your house somehow feels more your own, then you will understand what her singing did to our walls. Now I have told you the beginning, and still the beginning slides away like water under paws. For in the quiet after the council, the forest held its breath differently. It is an old place, and old places do not welcome change unless it carries the scent of destiny. Was this destiny? We were wolves, we did not know that word. We knew only that a cub had yawned and laughed and tugged my ear, and that a tiger had vowed to collect a debt. But we still wonder whether a name given in defiance can grow into a peace bigger than the defiance itself. And to ease your chesties, there was joy in the days that followed. Lessons, tumbles, frog-splash games at the pool when the morning was kind and the bees forgave our splashing. Even in your own streets, when a new child arrives or a neighbour's door is painted a brighter colour, don't you feel the day stand up a little taller? Don't you, making tea in the common light, find your hand steadier for reasons you cannot say? This is how the night the man-cub was accepted sits in me, part oath, part cradle, part hunger met by a larger hunger. Later I will tell you of the council's fissures, of lures and traps and words learned under fig leaves. For now, keep the picture, a grey ring of backs, a bull given, a law that bent and did not break, and a small warm weight asleep against my leg as the moon finished its climb. Morning came like a slow tongue of gold, licking the mist off stones and leaves. Baloo arrived before the cicadas remembered to wind their handles. He never bothered to disguise himself. You hear Baloo long before you see him, the grumble in his chest like a millstone finding its groove. Mowgli woke to that sound, blinked solemnly, and then sat up with a seriousness that did not belong to any cub I had known. I lay with my muzzle on my paws, a pace away, so close I could catch the small quiver in the boy's breath when he tried to look brave for his first lesson. Baloo is our teacher because he is slow. That is the first paradox the jungle lays at a cub's feet. Slow, so he is difficult to alarm. Slow, so he has patience enough to teach the same thing until it no longer feels taught. He began not with strength, but with words. The law of the jungle is not a scroll or a stone. It is a chant that grows bones as it is repeated. He rolled the old lines through his mouth, and the glade seemed to steady around them, the way a hut steadies around its beams. Mowgli copied the sounds in a careful whisper, tripping, then recovering, then smiling without remembering to stop. Baloo cuffed him gently when the boy began to chase a dragonfly mid-verse. Not anger, only punctuation. I flinched and then pretended not to. Mowgli looked at the ground, cheeks burning, pride dented like a fruit after a fall. That small ache rose in me again, the one that makes you pace even when there is no danger. In our pack, a cuff from a teacher is both map and mercy. In your streets, when a child is told to wait his turn at the water tap, the lesson is not about water. It is about how the hand learns to be a hand without becoming a fist. By mid-morning, Baloo had moved from measure to meaning. The words are not sacred by themselves, it is what they name that matters. The pack, he rumbled, and the vines trembled. The water truce, and the dust remembered thirst. The kill and every nose around us wrote its own history in the air. Mowgli asked questions that were not cub questions. Why must an outcast eat alone? Why must no one kill for sport? Why does a leader step down after his strength fails even if his mind still knows what is wise? He did not yet have the names for politics or mercy, but the edges of those stones were already pressing his palms. When Baloo judged the boy's tongue ready, he gave him the master words. That was the first time I felt something like a hinge swing inside our world. The syllables came old and smooth from the bear's mouth, and the birds in the high branches answered with a silence that was not indifference. Mowgli shaped the greeting slowly. "We be of one blood, ye and I." The sentence climbed the trees and slipped into bushes, and travelled the thin distances that lie between fear and recognition. When the words returned to us from the canopy, they were changed by having been heard. The law had taken a new student, and the forest had accepted the introduction. After the words, Baloo led us to water. He prefers to teach with the taste of mud on the tongue, as if knowledge sticks best when the body has to work for it. The pool was green as a lizard's lid. The bees were awake now, patient in their low orbit. Baloo demonstrated how to approach the water without scattering those who had arrived first. He spoke of the truce, when drought drives all fangs to the same rim, and even Shere Khan must drink without swagger. Mowgli listened, and then reached too quickly for a floating leaf. A bee scolded him, a small sting of yellow law. He yelped, startled more than hurt. Baloo did not scold, and I did not laugh. It is how you step back from a sting that tells your teacher who you will be. Bagheera came in the noon heat, black flowing over light like ink teaching paper how to behave. He watched from the shade until Baloo had finished a stanza and murmured that the boy's mouth had a nimble way with consonants. Praise from Bagheera is a rare fruit. He reminded Mowgli with a curl of his whiskers that a price had been paid for his life, and that the law keeps its accounts. Then he circled me and flicked my ear with the same paw Mowgli had tugged last night. "Brothers," he said, "make the best spies, because their hearts cannot be trained not to look back." He did not need to say that Shere Khan had been seen near the low ravine. In the afternoon we learned the talk of bees and a little of the talk of snakes. Baloo's voice flexed around those sounds as a vine curves toward light. Mowgli's tongue, fascinated, copied the hisses and the hums with that bright human accuracy which notices pattern and then tries to perfect it. "Do not be too proud when they answer you," Baloo said, "because you do not rule the greeting, you only borrow it. I thought of your markets, where a borrowed smile brings you a fair measure of grain, and wondered if you would recognize the same bargain here at the edge of a jungle pool." There was a moment near the hottest bit of the day when the boy fell asleep mid-lesson. Baloo droned softly, making the verses into warm shade, and Mowgli's eyelids failed. He tipped against my shoulder and slid down the slope of my ribs into the dust. Baloo paused, victorious. I nudged the boy awake. He blinked, ashamed, then angry at being ashamed. I remember that step in all young creatures, the discovery that weakness has two shadows, and that the second is pride. If you have ever dozed during a sermon and then woken determined to be better than everyone in the room, you have tasted the same fruit. To show him the world beyond rules, I took him running through the lower paths at dusk. This was not Baloo's lesson, and I told no one. We skimmed the backs of stones, stitched the dark with our fast, low thread. I showed him where the dhole had once come through, and where the path still wore their red impatience. He drank in the map. Human eyes are greedy, but his greed had a generosity to it, as if the more he learned, the more he wanted to share the learning with the air itself. His laughter, when it came, was quieter than in the morning. A new thing, more like a whispered promise to keep up. We returned to the den to find Mother sharpening her silence. She had heard Shere Khan far off, voicing his grievance to the bamboos. The tiger's complaint is a kind of weather. It wears on you while you sleep. We ate little. The boy practiced the greeting to the bees again, shyly, as if afraid the night would not approve. I listened to the forest's breathing and read the small sentences written in its pauses. Mowgli did not yet know how to read the dark. That would come. My task tonight was simpler, to fold my body around the space where his shoulder pressed the stone and remind any prowling thought that the boy was not alone. What I remember best of that day is not the words, but how they changed his steps. He did not simply run now, he kept to the wind's grammar. He did not merely splash, he checked for eyes on the rim of the water before he set the ripple going. He began to carry himself as if others existed, which is the first lesson of any law, jungle or village. In your houses, when a child learns to close a door quietly, the lesson is not about doors. It is about learning that the world is not yours to bang into shape. And yet, with all this learning, with all this rightness, a net of worry lay across the dusk. Words can protect a cub. They can also make him bold enough to try the edge of a ravine. The master words would one day open vines, and also tempt him to enter doors that should remain shut. But we still wonder whether a law learned too swiftly can make a heart forget why the law was written in the first place. To ease the air, let me tell you a small thing. After the bees forgave his blunder, Mowgli found a dropped feather by the pool. He tucked it behind my ear and called me handsome in a tone too solemn to be teasing. I wore that absurd blue for the length of a twilight, and no one laughed because no one saw. There are consolations that need no audience, and there are odd tokens a family accepts, because love, like language, is made of errors we decide to keep. That night, as sleep came to us like a slow river, Baloo's cadence lingered. It hung above our den like a low star, a promise that repetition can build a shelter. The boy mumbled one last greeting in his drowse. "We be of one blood." The words stroked my fur and died against my ribs. Outside, the forest rearranged its weight. The tiger was far. The bats wrote their cursive between boughs, and the law, which had felt like a hard stone in the morning, softened into something like a pillow under his head and mine. The tiger does not live only in his stripes. He lives in the way the air turns sour beside a ravine. He lives in the hush that sits on a thicket even when the wind is lively. For several dawns after the first lessons, I traced that hush and found it stitched through the lower paths. Shere Khan had been ranging wide, dragging his lame shoulder through fern and grit, leaving behind the bitter tang that makes pups whine in their sleep. He had grown bolder since the council. Boldness is not a roar. It is a patience that believes the world will fetch what you want if you wait in the right shadow. Tabaki the jackal came first, as agents of trouble often do. He is a small mouth with a long memory for other people's mistakes. He yapped at the edge of our clearings, not close enough to draw blood, close enough to draw ears. He told the half-truths that cut deeper than clean lies. He said the pack was tired of a leader who missed his stag. He said a man-cub does not make a strong den, only a noisy one. He said Shere Khan had been seen sniffing the boundaries like a prince measuring new rooms. A rumour is a burr that travels on any fur that brushes it. Before noon, I heard Tabaki's burr stuck in 3 different throats. I followed the tiger's trail alone in the afternoons, skimming under sal boughs, where sunlight collects like coins no one can spend. The prints were old in places and fresh, where the clay remembered better. The lame paw left a dragging crescent. Sometimes the mark was overrun by cattle hoof, where the village drove its wealth toward flatter grass. The village smelled of smoke and old iron and the sweet dust of grain. I do not hate that smell. It is a map to a kind of thinking that builds straight lines inside a crooked forest. It is also a promise of trouble when a tiger begins to hunt too near it. From a knoll of stone, I watched the fields at evening. Men moved in rows like beetles, with fire tucked at their ends. The fires were small and tended and lawful. Mowgli had once asked why men liked to keep their fire in bowls and not let it walk as the sparks wanted. I told him that bowls are a way to trick fear into work. It was an answer that felt wise, until I pictured Shere Khan watching the same bowls with his yellow patience. The tiger did not fear the bowls. He feared the men's certainty. To break it, he would need a story. He intended to make that story out of us. At night, in the den, the boy slept as children do when the day has filled every pocket of their minds. Raksha breathed the steady syllables of a mother who has decided a danger and filed it. For now, in a drawer, she can reach in the dark. Father rarely spoke of the tiger. He spoke of quarry and weather and the paths that remained cool into noon. Akela went thinner. Leaders evaporate from the edges first. His eyes stayed keen, but his paws argued with the distance between leap and kill. You can feel a pack's faith loosen the way you feel a rope go soft in the rain. It is still strong. It is not what it was. Baloo muttered that the law would hold us if we held it. Bagheera made no speeches. He hunted more, as if to purchase quiet with meat. I ran more errands than before. A brother serves by running ahead and behind, reading the sentences the jungle writes with hoof and pad and claw. The tiger's grammar was growing confident. He ghosted beside the cattle tracks and then retreated, content to let the smell of him finish the work. Fear is efficient. It makes mothers pull their cubs closer and makes old wolves wonder if their leader's shadow is the right length. One evening, the wind forgot to move. It was so still the bees seemed to hang on strings. I felt the pause and knew it as a question the forest was asking me. I moved to the low ravine where the stones are black with water that never makes up its mind. The rasp of thorn on fur came from below. I crouched and watched the stripe lines work slowly through brake and reed. Shere Khan stopped, lifted his head, and tasted the air. His breath sounded like heavy cloth being folded. He did not look toward our den. He looked past it, toward the ridges that hide the council rock. The deliberate nature of that glance put an ache in my teeth. He spoke, not to me, not to any one creature, but to the general night. He said the pack would remember what it had forgotten. He said a man's smell was a tax the wolves could not afford. He said debts were patient animals that outlived the debtors. His voice was not loud. Loudness wastes. When he finished, the jackal's thin cheer burst somewhere behind him and was silenced with a slap I could not see. The tiger then pulled himself up the far bank, and the reeds fell back so slowly, like a curtain that has just seen the ending it expected. I reported to Bagheera first, because he is built to hear without swallowing the messenger. He listened like a hunter, weighing the exactness of each word against its usefulness. Then he told me to tell Akela, and I did, and the older wolves stared past me into a space I could not fill. It is hard to speak to those who can smell the edge of their season. They hear every news as evidence. I turned finally to Mowgli and told him a lighter version, trimmed of threats. He tried to make a brave joke of it, something about making the tiger dance by the water with a string tied to his tail. The joke fell because he was not laughing. He was studying my eyes. The next days we practiced caution as if it were a craft. Mowgli kept paths that offered 2 exits. He learned to pass his scent through running water where he could. I shadowed him, and when he grew impatient with my shadow, I let it lengthen, which is a way of saying I watched from farther, but not less. We avoided the scrub near the cattle wallows. We watched the sky for vultures drifting in lazy counsels over a place where something new had died. Fear can make you meticulous. That is one of its few virtues. To ease the coil, I would sometimes tell him small human stories I had learned from the edge of the village, how the women could tell by the first frog song when the millet would be ready, how the men mended the same pot 5 times because the crack had earned its seat at the table. He answered with jungle stories of his own, clumsy at first, then better. A boy making a story is like a tree testing the direction of its trunk. It sways, overcorrects, then finds a line that will hold storms. One afternoon, rain stepped across the forest in 5 straight lines, and then forgot to come back for its footprints. We went to the pool, not to learn, only to be wet with everyone else. The bees forgave the sudden splash. A kite called somewhere high. Mowgli lay on his back and floated and watched the canopy knit itself out of dripping green. I stood in the shallows and let the water write cold bracelets around my legs. We were not careless. We were careful and happy at the same time, which is a kind of defiance. Joy does not always require safety. Sometimes it requires a decision to meet danger with open eyes and a fair division of your weight on the stones. Still, the tiger worked his edges. He left a scrap of hide near a path we favoured, a mischief intended to remind us the cattle were his to kill or spare. He laid his scent along a route where the pack's hunters returned thin. He wanted to be a fact inside our throats. It is a clever method. If he could not yet tear us, he would live in our talk. I wished then that bravery was a solid thing you could keep in a den. It is not. It is a habit that must be practiced daily in small, unhandsome ways. You who live in streets know this. There are days when a letter on coarse paper makes your hands tremble before you open it. There are evenings when a neighbour's cough at the wall turns your supper to ash. You learn to wash a cup carefully because care is the one rope you can pull on without fear of it breaking. You learn to greet the one who annoys you because greeting is a small law that keeps larger laws from fraying. We were doing the same, in fur and leaf and waterlight. The pack's murmur grew. The younger wolves ran in tighter knots, speaking too loudly. The elders spoke softly and often to the ground. Akela watched us with a gaze that forgave more than it used to. Tabake came and went, mouth full of other people's opinions. The tiger did not hurry. Why would he? The season was arranging itself around him like a comfortable mat. The man-cub was learning quickly and laughing sometimes and cutting his feet on new stones. A lame shoulder and a patient hunger against a boy who had learned the greetings of bees. You see the sums. They do not reassure at first glance, but we still wonder whether a danger that announces itself so perfectly is already making a mistake. Does a patient enemy grow careless when you answer with patience of your own? Does fear lose a tooth when you name it aloud to a friend at dusk? I cannot promise answers. I can tell you that Mowgli, on the evening after the rain, tucked a new feather behind my ear, brown and dull, and more sensible than the blue one, and said I was the best ear any brother had owned. We ate, we slept, we woke, and the tiger continued to pace the rim of our thoughts without yet finding the centre. If you need a lighter image to carry, take this one. On a morning when the sky forgot its colour and wore only brightness, Mowgli tried to teach me to balance a smooth stone on the bridge of my nose. I tried because love is often an agreement to attempt the ridiculous. The stone fell, bounced and rolled into a patch of mint that startled the air into sweetness. We laughed, and even Baloo, ambushing us with a lesson about silence, abandoned the ambush for a grin he pretended not to have. The days became a braid of lessons, errands, and the tiger's distant breathing. We tightened our den, we counted our paths. We told the truth to each other, even when it was heavy. When sleep came, it brought smaller dreams that fit inside the larger one we were living. On the edge of that dream, Shere Khan's patience kept time. He would come closer. He would try to make the pack choose. For now, we stood where a family stands when weather gathers. Together, a little hungry for certainty, a little richer for having none. Tracks are a kind of scripture. Before a cub learns to read sky or mood, he learns to read where weight has pressed truth into dust. In the days before the trouble with the monkeys, I led Mowgli along the lower runs and the red paths where deer try to look like wind. We rose before bees were ambitious and studied where civet and porcupine had traded opinions in the dark. Mowgli crouched, elbows on knees, the way he always did when the world wrote in small print. He learned the splay of chital in panic, the tidy commas of hare, the bored drag of a sloth bear, the nervous embroidery of birds who had remembered a snake too late. When he put his hand next to a print, the lesson deepened. His fingers measured stride and stagger. He asked questions that smelled not of danger, but of craft. Why does the doe trust this bend? Why do wild dogs prefer the hard shoulder of the path when the grass is softer? Why does a herd return to the same lick after one of their own has not returned? I told him what I knew and what I guessed, and where my guessing ended. I let him watch the place until the answer offered itself like a shy animal. not to be chased, only to be accepted. We played a game that was not a game. I would vanish into cover, write my going with the barest strokes, then circle and cross my own trail. He would follow, lose me, find me again, frown at his mistake, and try another angle. He loved the moment when a faint scuff became a sentence. When you live among trees, certainty is not a door that swings. It is a mat that appears by degrees under your feet, because you have learned how to treat the ground as a mind. Baloo, serious as always, approved. He added his own margins to my maps. He taught Mowgli the password of the bees in fuller grammar, a chant that soothed and warned at once. He refreshed the master words for the people of the jungle and made him practice until the words belonged to his tongue and not only to his memory. Bagheera, passing like a shadow that had learned manners, reminded the boy that passwords are tools, not crowns. A greeting opens a path. It does not make you owner of the path. Mowgli nodded, understanding as only a boy can, which is to say he understood enough to be earnest and not enough to be safe. On the ridge above the fig trees, the Bandar-log watched. They always watched. The monkeys are a mirror you should not trust. They can copy a gesture with the speed of light and the mind of a puddle. We smelled them before we saw them, the dust smack of too many feet, the sweet, stale breath of fruit stolen and forgotten. They broke twigs for the pleasure of noise, whispered loud secrets about a city they adored but had never built, a palace with pillars of air and a dome of wish. They praised themselves into a fever. The pack calls them the people without law, and the name fits like an itch. Mowgli was curious. Curiosity in a cub is a leaf glinting on the lip of a fall. He tried the polite silence first. Then, when they showered him with seed shells and compliments, he laughed in spite of himself. The Bandar-log excel at praise as jackals excel at appetite. They called him the cleverest, the strongest, the one who would teach them everything. They begged for the master words as if hunger had made them dignified. They called down a promise that they would make him their chief, that he would be carried above the forest in a cradle of arms. A promise is cheap in the mouth of a creature that does not remember breakfast by noon. Baloo growled and told the monkeys to mind their own wind. Bagheera curled his tail and said danger would come of this. I stood between the boy and the worst of their talk, and made my silence into a fence. Mowgli heard us and wanted to obey. He is not stubborn for the sport of it, but he is human. Humans are drawn to applause, as moths are to the edge of a flame that promises warmth and delivers forgetting. He did not go to them. He merely did not flee them. That is sometimes all mischief requires. To reset his ear, I took him deeper into the business of signs. We studied where the langur had crossed above the ravine, leaving a stray grey hair on a thorn. We practiced reading the breeze that had slipped along the bamboo and held the faintest bitterness of tiger, far off yet, like a debt mentioned but not collected. I showed him the stones that ring softly when the heat has gone, and the loam that swallows sound when rain wants to begin, but cannot. The jungle is generous with clues when you are humble and merciless, when you are proud. Humility came and went for him in those hours, as it does for any student who learns quickly. He laughed when he solved a riddle. He laughed louder when he solved two in a row. Then he grew quiet, having caught himself loving his cleverness, and began again with the care of a craftsman who knows a bright knife can slip. To loosen the rope of his pride, I told a small story, how I once followed goat prints with my nose too close to the ground, and walked under a hornet nest without noticing the polite warning they had hung in the air. I wore their lesson for 2 days in a necklace of stings. He listened, eyes wide, and then told me of a time in the village when he had tried to copy a man's scythe swing and nearly trimmed his own foot. We laughed at ourselves until the trees seemed to enjoy us. The Bandar log, meanwhile, rehearsed attention. They shadowed us without weight, like thoughts that pretend to be your own. When Mowgli greeted a bee with the proper word, they mimicked the hiss and the hum with wrong music that still somehow charmed the air. When he called politely to a snake hole to ask for safe passage, they repeated the sounds with silly flourishes. The hole did not answer them. The forest is not flattered by echo. The boy looked away, a little ashamed to have been admired by such mouths. It was Bagheera who said the word cold lairs first, as a warning folded in passing. He spoke of the old stone city sinking into green, of pillars that hold up nothing, of stairs that lead everywhere and nowhere, of roofs whose shadows keep promises the walls no longer keep. The monkeys love the place, he said, because it looks like a plan without the labor of a plan. They race through its broken teeth and call it a throne. If ever they speak to you of greatness, remember that their greatness lives where snakes sleep warm in hollow idols. The boy nodded, but the word throne had already found a shiny shelf in his mind. I tried to anchor him with ordinary happiness. We ate sour tamarind that made him pull faces and grin at his own grimace. We chased our shadows along a fallen teak until both shadows became one at a kink in the trunk. We lay belly down over a warm, flat rock and watched ants discover a crumb of honey and teach each other joy with their wonderful elbows. You know the medicine of such small things. Your city days, if they are to be lived at all, rely on them. A well-swept doorstep, a cup cooled on a sill, a neighbour who pretends not to notice your mistake until you have corrected it yourself. The master words, when used rightly, began to open the world for him. A sleepy kite tilted and tolerated a greeting. The bees, scolding but gentle now, admitted our thirst when we approached slow. Even a small snake paused, flicked its tongue, and declined to take insult at our passing. The jungle nodded to him the way elders nod to a child who has learned to speak without kicking the table. Still, there are creatures who will not be spoken to by law or kindness. Monkeys live outside grammar. They adore the idea of language and betray its meaning with every breath. On an evening when the sun went down in pieces, a monkey dropped a fig at our paws with a flourish and called Mowgli the friend of all and the future of all. He invited him to see their city, their schools, their courts, their mighty plans. Baloo would have swatted him from the air, but the fellow was gone in a rustle and a joke. I felt the air tighten, just enough to notice. Praise had found a back door. You can shut your front gate and still wake to chatter in your own rafters. We resolved to keep to cover for a few days, to starve the monkeys of audience. Bagheera offered to train the boy in the art of vanishing while standing still, a trick the panther considers practical, and the bear calls an offence against decent visibility. Mowgli tried and tried, and once, for a full count of 12, I lost him in a wedge of mottled light, and thought my heart would enter my throat like a deer bursting from brush. He came out laughing, proud, and careful at the same time. It was a good evening. It did not last, but we still wonder whether a child can handle praise without first being taught how to store it properly. Like fire in a bowl. Will a bright word always reach for the brightest part of the mind and make it careless? Will the jungle forgive a moment of borrowed vanity when the cost of that vanity comes due in old stone corridors where no law holds? I cannot answer yet. I can tell you that the monkeys had fixed their eyes on him, and he had not yet learned how to disagree with a compliment. To spare you an ache before it arrives, hold this lighter picture. That night, after Bagheera's lesson, the boy placed a twig crown on my head, woven absurdly with grass and one brave yellow petal. He declared me the prince of sensible ears and bowed with real ceremony. I wore it until sleep took me and lost it somewhere in the moss. In the morning, a beetle was wearing the petal, as if it had always been meant for him. The forest redistributes honor more wisely than we do. We slept. The wind moved in thin lines through the sal leaves. Somewhere far off, a stone city dreamed of being whole. Closer, a troop of monkeys rehearsed a theft and called it a parade. In our den, the boy breathed evenly, his hand still smelling faintly of tamarind and warm rock. When dawn came, it carried a plan in noisy hands. Monkeys do not begin with silence. Dawn had not yet crested the last black ribs of the hills when the bandar logs spilled themselves into the trees like a basket of noisy beads. They came whispering loudly, praising yesterday's plans, dropping figs as if they were crowns, swearing that this morning would make history remember their names. Mowgli and I were on the lower path, the one that keeps to the shadow of fallen teak, where the dust holds the print of any creature too clumsy to float. He was pointing out to me the thread-fine drag that means a beetle has chosen to pull his prize backward instead of forward. "Such patience," he said, and smiled at an effort smaller than his own finger. Praise found us first. A rain of compliments, sugary and stale, fell from 3 branches at once. "Future chief," they chattered, "friend of all, teacher of law." They offered a tour of their city of air. They asked for a joke, then a dance step, then the master words spoken loud enough for the leaves to wear as jewelry. He shook his head and tried to be grave. He remembered Baloo's warning. He remembered Bagheera's tail quiet. He forgot one thing only, that attention is a net, not a blessing. It happened as quickly as bright water goes slack. From the left, a loop of vine in a clever noose fell across his shoulders. From the right, 2 grey hands closed on his forearms in a grip that felt like laughter but was not. Above, 5 bodies swung down like arguments that had already decided to win. Mowgli yelped, not in fear at first, only in surprise that the game had a rule he had not agreed to. I lunged and took a monkey by the calf and was rewarded with fur and a mouthful of insult. He twisted, he shrieked, he was gone, and now the troop had the boy's weight and lifted him into their story. Baloo came like a boulder, discovering it had always been a bear. He cuffed 2 from the air, and they smacked against the trunks with harmonic thuds. Bagheera slipped out of shade with the economy of a knife leaving cloth. He took 1, 2, 3, and for a heartbeat the troop lost its rhythm, and we heard the old city in their scream, the panic that lives under every brag. Then their numbers remembered themselves. 10 voices became 50, and 50 became noise. They poured up and outward, carrying Mowgli like a hymn they did not understand, and the trees ahead of us began to repeat the word cold lairs. If you have ever watched a hat blow down the length of a street you cannot cross for traffic, and seen strangers jog after it with good intentions and bad timing, you know the particular ache of that chase. Baloo crashed through vine and creeper, promising the world that if it would stop moving for a single breath, he could mend the last 12 heartbeats. Bagheera ranged to the flanks, aiming not at the chatter, but at the leader hidden inside it. I ran ahead, cutting diagonals where trunks lean, so that every time they thought themselves alone with their prize, they had to see my eyes reading their path. Mowgli was not passive. He bit and twisted and remembered lessons as well as any cub could when air is changing hands too quickly around him. He shouted the greeting to the birds and the bees, which only amused the monkeys. And then he hissed a snake courtesy he did not fully know into the leaves, which silenced a branch for a heartbeat. He caught a liana and tried to break their speed with his weight. He failed because numbers are a gravity of their own. Yet he kept his mind even as the world lifted and swung and blurred. And when he could place his voice, he cried out not for help, but for news. Cold lairs, he called, and Chill the kite, that disciplined letter-carrier of high altitudes, heard and banked. We lost ground at the ravine where stones knit slick with a seam of old water. Monkeys are poor at law and excellent at mischief. They do not plan, they rehearse, and the rehearsals have taught their bodies quick mathematics. They scudded across on a line of hanging roots and used Mowgli as counterweight. Baloo tried the same and nearly paid with his ribs. Bagheera did not try. He went down, found the shallow, came up sleek with decision. By then the troop was on the far bank, flashing clever hands and promises they meant to break by noon. Their city, they yelled, their schools, their glorious courts where all wrongs are righted with applause, their throne for the boy who spoke with every tongue and had shown them a law they would use to be free of law. Cold lairs is older than our patience. The jungle covers it because that is kinder than leaving it visible. Pillars that once held notions now hold only snakes and ivy. Stairs lead upward into roofs that are no longer there. Stones remember feet that never learned jungle quiet. The monkeys love it because its broken order suits their ambition. They call beauty what is merely complicated. They call shelter the shadow of a roof that collapsed 3 monsoons ago. They dragged Mowgli toward its teeth and sang nonsense with focus. I broke from the chase because the story needed a new instrument. If a door will not open, find the wall that would rather be a door. I thought of Kaa, old, long, and full of a memory that has outlived 3 kinds of foolishness. Kaa moves like a piece of history deciding to stand up. He has no love for the Bandar-log. They follow him as many follow wisdom, only when the wisdom is already in the air, pressing at their throats. Bagheera had once said that if ever the monkeys took the boy, we must pay in humility and go to the rock where the ancient bamboo draws a cool line on hot days, and ask the python to accept a debt that would not be easily repaid. I told Baloo with a bark that means divide and survive. He roared something that was not language and took down 3 more tree-court clerks who were trying to legislate gravity. Bagheera caught my eye and flicked his whiskers toward the eastern path. He understood. The panther understands almost everything and forgives almost nothing. I ran. If you have run errands with fear at your heels, you know how a forest changes shape when each root is also a clock. The path to Kaa is not long, but every yard is thick with choices you wish would make themselves. I skimmed the places I knew he frequented. The warm stones where afternoon teaches him patience, the saplings whose leaves carry his polished scent, the rat run where he sometimes waits because wisdom often waits where fuss is busiest. I called in the low courtesy Baloo had taught us for the people of the rock. The air replied with a stillness that meant attendance. He came forward without announcing his length. That is his way, first the tongue tasting a story, then the head, old and well-kept, wearing the dignity of unused hurry. Then coil upon coil, emerging as if the ground were returning rope to a sailor. I gave him the news with the minimum of adjectives. He values nouns. Monkeys, boy, cold lairs, Bagheera, debt. His eyes did not change, and yet the space around them took on a firmness I had not seen since the last time the red dogs argued with the sun. He asked whether Chill flew. I said yes. He asked whether the boy had spoken the greeting. I said yes. He asked whether the boy had believed praise. I paused, and then said that he had believed enough of it to be carried by it. Kaa nodded, as if that answer had pleased him in some sad way. Wisdom loves to be right, even when the world regrets the proof. We moved, not quickly and not slowly, but with the right weight for an hour that would not forgive shouting. Kaa does not hurry because he has outlived the cost of hurry. He knows how fear in others will clear the path if you give it time to do its work. As we went, I said the thing a younger wolf would not say. I thanked him before the help was given. He accepted the thanks as one accepts weather. In towns, when you hold a door for someone carrying too many packages, you do not expect gratitude. You expect the physics of kindness to continue elsewhere in the building. Kaa's kindness is physics that has read too many histories. We found Bagheera at the rim of the old city, and Baloo one turn behind him, chest heaving, pride set aside like a heavy pot. The monkeys had made counsel above the broken courtyard, their bodies pattering on stone like bad rain. They had placed Mowgli where a king would sit if the court were real. They chanted praise and asked for laws and ignored his answers. He tried to make the master words bend them into sense. He tried to remind them that to sit above is not the same as to be above. They clapped and demanded more. Kaa entered the court without asking for an invitation. The monkeys saw him and remembered a scripture older than their chatter. Fear travelled their limbs like a hand striking 100 drums from the right distance. He spoke, and the syllables were not the master words Baloo had taught, but another grammar, one the jungle keeps for those who remember the shape of sleep. His coils rose and fell, not in threat, but in music. The troop went from noise to hush to fascination. even I felt my breath tie itself in a neat bow and forget where it had left the loose end. Bagheera touched my shoulder with his whiskers and reminded me to blink. It is not for me to tell what happened inside each monkey's mind when Kaa sang the old, slow song. Some secrets belong to the art that saved us. I can tell you that the court emptied of intention. I can tell you that the air became gentle to hold. I can tell you that, in the middle of that gentleness, Mowgli looked at me with a steadiness that belonged to a wolf among wolves. I slipped to his side, loosened the last 2 loops, and said his name as if it were both command and apology. He answered with a faint laugh that meant later I will make a joke of this, and for now I am awake and small. We left, as the great coils settled like evening across the ruins' floor. Baloo bowed in the way bears bow when their backs hurt, but their hearts have grown clear. Bagheera said, "In 3 words, a lifetime of debt. Kaa accepted none of it, which is how debt becomes a different kind of bond." The monkeys spilled away into night, chattering the postscript that always follows a surrendered frenzy. Plans were sworn. Blame was assigned to the angle of a particular stone. Greatness was rescheduled. On the path out, Mowgli was quiet in the way a mind is when it has been handed a mirror that shows more than face. He thanked Kaa with the carefulness Baloo had taught him. He did not promise anything. He did not boast. He walked as one who has learned that attention is light that burns if you stand in it too long. Later, back in the den, he would make a joke for us. A small thing about crowns that do not fit and thrones that pinch. It would help. Tonight, he leaned against me and allowed his breath to be ordinary. But we still wonder whether a heart once lifted by empty praise ever fully forgets the sensation of height. Will he later choose the bowl for his fire because he remembers the edge of flame without a bowl? Will he forgive himself for believing what he wanted to be true? I do not know. I know only that he slept, and we kept watch, and the old city sighed as if relieved to be merely ruin again. For air, take this. On the way home, a night moth blundered into my eye, and I sneezed with such alarm that Mowgli laughed out loud for the first time since the chase. Baloo pretended to deliver a lecture on the correct posture for sneezing in the presence of elders. Bagheera, who claims dignity as a birthright, ruined his claim by smiling where we could see it. Some rescues end with ceremony. Ours ended with the rearrangement of faces into peace. Night put its cool hand on the ruins, and the dust remembered how to sleep. Kaa's coils, which had been music a moment ago, settled into the exact geometry that makes old stone feel younger. The Bandalog, released from their own astonishment, fled in loose loops, tripping over their brags. I stood with Mowgli at the rim where a fallen arch makes a kind of lip against the dark. He clutched a scrape on his forearm as if it were a thought that needed holding. Baloo breathed like a forge, finding its rhythm. Bagheera's side leaked a steady, dignified line that he refused to call pain. We were saved. That is the plainest way to say it, and yet salvation has a texture that takes a while to recognize in your fur. Kaa spoke first, because appetite had spoken last. He did not boast. He told us what the ruins had once held, lines and lines of feet that could not read the forest, bowls for light, baskets for noise, roofs that tried to teach rain manners. He flicked his tongue toward the broken idols and said they were good for keeping heat, but poor at keeping promises. Mowgli listened without fidgeting. A boy's silence can be many things. Tonight it was gratitude shaped like attention. Baloo, who hates apologies the way bees hate smoke, offered one anyway. His low voice rumbled that the teaching had failed, that his paw should have been heavier and his patience longer, and that he had been a fool to let words stand between the boy and a net. Bagheera swished his tail to slice the apology in half. He said, "Blame is a vine that grows faster than cassava and feeds no one." He said, "The fault was in the monkeys and in the sweet itch of praise, which is older than any of us and will outlive even Kaa's memory." Kaa did not correct him. He only watched the boy. Mowgli spoke then. He said, "Thank you the way a river says thank you when flood leaves and banks remain." He said he understood that attention is not affection, that a cheer can be a trap, that a throne made of hands is no throne at all. He did not promise to be wise. He promised to listen longer. Kaa nodded, which in him is like the turning of a season. He told Mowgli a small thing to remember, that remembering is a muscle, and that it grows not from great vows, but from daily wait. We left the cold lairs by the eastern steps, where creepers have tied the stones into a slow pact. Kaa went with us as far as the bamboo that feels always like shade even at noon. There he paused and laid down a sentence that was not a threat, and not quite a blessing. He said, "The jungle gives back what you are brave enough to return." He slid away, a line of moonlight deciding to become river. For a moment the night felt larger, as if a wall had been gently moved to make room for a thought. On the path home we tasted how relief makes the tongue quick and the mind slow. Baloo tried a lesson and the words came tangled. Bagheera tried a joke and it stepped on its own tail. Mowgli saved us all by laughing at nothing in particular, a laughter that lifted and dropped in easy waves until the rhythm of walking took it over. He tucked a rag of moss into my shoulder fur to keep the scrape from chafing, and told me I looked like a very small hill. I told him hills do not run this well. We were better after that. At the den, Raksha inspected him with the calm precision that makes cubs stand straighter. Father's eyes wandered to the mouth of the cave, and then returned to the boy with relief he hid poorly. Mowgli sat and let the attention work on him like salve. He confessed the part that was his. No one scolded. Akela came later, grey with miles, and stood in the doorway where moonlight draws authority across a leader's shoulders whether he asks for it or not. He listened to the tale in silence. When it was done, he touched the boy's head with his muzzle once, as a ledger accepts an entry. Something eased in the roof. We slept, and the sleep was the kind that remembers danger and invites rest anyway. Morning brought small reparations. Mowgli went to the pool and practiced the bee greeting until the bees took pity on his earnest face and allowed him to drink. He brought Baloo a branch with smooth leaves to rub into the sore places, and fetched Bagheera a sunlight patch exactly the size a panther prefers for mending. He did not make a speech of his contrition. He made chores of it. This is how a boy becomes a person in the forest or in your streets, not by ceremony, but by work done cleanly, until it becomes part of how the day knows itself. Baloo resumed lessons with a gentleness that looked like sternness from the outside. He shortened the verses and lengthened the silences. He put the master words back in the boy's mouth, not to dazzle, but to anchor. Bagheera taught under shade and taught the art of vanishing without becoming absent, of listening for the step before the voice. I taught what runs between their teachings, the thread of signs, the patience to let a broken twig say what it meant to say instead of what you wish it had said. Mowgli learned quickly and quietly, which is the surest sign that the lesson has entered the place beyond pride. Beyond the lessons, the jungle's other story continued. Shere Khan lay in the reeds of rumour and let the pack carry his name. Tabaki, tireless purveyor of other people's appetites, skittered along the edge of our clearings with news he called fresh, and which smelled always of yesterday's fear. Akela missed once at the leap and once more at the landing. The young wolves, who had never been hungry, began to imagine how hunger might feel if led by a different voice. The council rock grew heavier by the day, as stones do when they are asked to hold too much hope. One noon, the shadow under the sal was thicker than it needed to be. Bagheera pointed with his whiskers, and I read the story he was writing in the dust with his tail tip. We followed it to the ridge and found the place where Shere Khan had lain to think. The grass there was pressed not as by sleep, but as by planning. He had watched the valley where the herds moved. He had counted the men who came with sticks and the boys who came with noise. He had decided to be patient a little longer. A patient tiger is a weather pattern. It lives above you, even when you forget to look up. That night, around the den mouth, we spoke softly. Mowgli asked why the pack could not simply name the right thing and have it be done. Raksha answered that naming is only the first step, and that a pack is a story it tells itself with meat and memory, and the leaders wait on the council rock. Akela said little. When leaders speak less, everyone else speaks more. Father told a hunting tale with a cheerful ending because cheerful endings are tools when fear sits too close. We listened and let the cheer do its work. To ease your ear, here is a small picture. Mowgli decided that if I was a hill, he must be a tree. He stood on a rock and held his arms up until two miners perched, puzzled and dignified, for exactly the length of a breath and a half. He did not move. When they left, he did a bow that delighted no one except himself and me. Baloo pretended not to see. Bagheera rolled his eyes. In the elegant manner of cats who intend to be admired for their disapproval, days braided themselves into readiness. We kept to cover where cover mattered and to open ground where surprise would favour us. Mowgli's feet learned to place themselves with the courtesy of a guest who expects to be invited back. He practiced the old songs until they felt like water. Then let them be water, and did not try to sip at every step. He remembered Kaa's lesson without making it a banner. The Banda log gave us wide trees and louder lies. Cold lairs sank another inch into forgetfulness. But we still wonder whether a mind that has been lifted by flattery becomes forever lighter to the touch. When danger presses again, will he step toward the nearest cheer or toward the nearest law? Will the memory of a python's music keep him honest when a circle of wolves grows impatient for spectacle? These questions rode beside us the way cicadas ride a noon. Not loud enough to stop the day, not quiet enough to be ignored. For now, let the air loosen, That evening the boy tested a new way of saying goodnight to the bees, a shorter courtesy that sounded like river talk. They tolerated it with the generosity of tired elders. He fell asleep with his hand in my ruff, and his breath steady as a chant. The moon rose, stepped on a cloud, and rose again. From the far reeds came the slow, folding sound of a tiger thinking. The council rock waited. The law waited too, not angry, only exact. Council Rock is not only a place, it is a temperature. It keeps a certain cool even when the noon has been unkind. In the nights after the cold lairs, that cool felt thinner, as if the stone itself were sweating, with a fever it would not admit. We gathered in the old way, rings within rings, and Aquila mounted the rock with the ease of habit and the cost of years. He still stood beautifully. A leader's first duty is posture. But in the circle of his silence I could hear an arithmetic being done by wolves who had never liked numbers until power offered them a prize for counting. You know the story they tell, how Aquila missed his stag. The leap was true, and the heart behind it truer. But truth does not shorten distance. The stag turned, the wind turned, and the world decided to be half a whisker farther than it had been the last time. He landed with a breath too little in his ribs, and a bruise too loud in his bones. We did not sing about it, which was a kindness and also an admission. The younger wolves avoided his eyes while pretending to look brave. The older ones looked straight at him to keep him upright. I looked at the ground and read what it could not bear to say aloud. The rock felt heavier. Tabaki, who is nobody and likes to stand where decisions lean, came and went like a rumour someone had dressed in fur. He did not speak during council because the law still had enough teeth to forbid it. But he threaded the outer rings before and after, carrying phrases that settled like ash on our backs. A leader should be strong and lucky. A leader should be new enough not to remember debts. A leader should not have adopted a man's smell into his den. He never named Shere Khan because cowards never name their employers when the wind might shift. Bagheera watched with that sidelong patience that can make a cunning wolf confess without being asked. Baloo grumbled doctrine under his breath as if doctrine could stiffen a rock. Raksha was stone where stone is proudest, not moving a whisker more than law required, and nothing less than love commanded. Mowgli sat quiet beside me, and the quiet was not childish this time. It was the quiet of a pupil. In a room where a teacher has stumbled, but the lesson still needs to be finished. He kept his palms flat on the dust, as if to steady it. When the law called for the showing of new cubs, we brought them and named them, and for a moment the ritual wrapped us like a warm pelt. Names echoed from cliff to thorn and came back to us carrying the old promise. The pack is larger than any one appetite, any one sorrow. Then Shere Khan's absence spoke. He did not come to challenge, not yet. He let his not coming weigh us down. The reeds near the ravine had his stripe smell and his complaint still folded in them. He intended, as he always intended, to make us do his work for him. There is a point in any council when words stop being words and become a scent. I smelled fear under the talk, a specific fear with brass in it, the smell of the red flower. Some of the young ones had tasted it from afar in the village wind. They spoke of it with the mixture of reverence and resentment you reserve for a tool that belongs to someone else. Fire had become an idea in their throats, and ideas in throats can be as dangerous as thorns in paws. They did not say, "Bring it." They said, "What if?" They said, "We should not be afraid of a bowl of light." They said, "A man-cub who walks between us might fetch what wolves cannot grow." Aquila heard all of it, the words and the sense braided through them. He held himself as still as a plan. The law allows a leader to lead as long as his strength feeds the pack, and his judgment feeds the law. He reminded us of this with no heat, asking only that meat and memory speak true. Some spoke true. Some spoke as if truth were a soft thing you could pat into shape if you kept your paw confidently on it. Bagheera lifted his chin and said that anyone who wanted to discuss the man-cub's smell could first discuss the price a black hunter had once paid to buy the boy's life. The price had hooves. The memory had teeth. It made the outer ring swallow. When the moon climbed, the rings opened. Counsel was not over. Counsels of this kind take nights to finish, and the finishing is never tidy. We went down to the lower path. Mowgli breathed out a single sentence that sounded more like a note than a word. He said Aquila stood well. He said it again, as if practicing a kind of loyalty that might be needed soon. I could feel the same practice catching in my chest. Loyalty must also be trained, or it becomes a pose that collapses under the first hard weather. We did what families do when politics chafes the skin. We made the night ordinary. Baloo found a patch of sweet grass and announced it as if it were treasure. Bagheera took a short, effective nap that looked exactly like arrogance and was exactly like recovery. Raksha counted the breaths of her youngest and accounted for the day by moving her tail twice. Mowgli invented a game where stones on the ground became stars and asked me to nudge the constellations into better grammar. I obliged, and for a while the galaxy arranged itself according to our private law. The next dusk, news arrived with pause. The herd's path had been cut strangely where the reeds give way to open water. Someone had driven them to flounder before the bank, then left a smear of musk and a certainty. The wolves who had found it spoke without looking at one another, which is how you can tell a story is walking them rather than the other way round. The tiger had made a clumsy kill. He had left a trophy where it would be seen, not for hunger, for argument. He would bring it with him to council if invited. If not invited, he would be present anyway in the mouths of those who wanted him. We met again at Council Rock. The stone had kept its temperature, but I no longer trusted its cool. The young wolves came forward with their dreams rolled up under their tongues. They unrolled them carefully, speaking of a pack that moved faster, leaped further, shone brighter in other eyes. The old wolves wrinkled their muzzles the way good elders wrinkle paper before burning it, to make sure it catches. Aquila listened. That is both the virtue and the wound of leadership. He asked for Meat to speak again. The voices thinned. Meat speaks slowly. It is the one witness that cannot be coached. In the quiet, Shere Khan's name arrived on a breeze from the ravine. No sound, only that sour change in the air that had become the shadow of a voice. Mowgli's head tilted, and his hand drifted toward the space where the red flower exists in the vocabulary of men. He did not touch anything, but I could hear the word in him, the one he had used only in the careful tone of a student reciting a warning. Baloo caught the drift of it and shook his head once. Bagheera saw the same and did not shake his head. He watched the boy as if watching a bridge decide what load it could bear. After council, we went alone to the knoll where the grasses keep secrets, better than stones do. There Mowgli spoke, not loudly and not to boast. He said he understood that to bring the red flower would be to bring a human thing into a wolf's quarrel. He said he also understood that sometimes a quarrel ceases to be a family matter when a tiger decides to collect a debt. I told him a small truth. A tool is a truth with a handle. Whoever grips the handle is the one the truth serves. He weighed that and did not answer. To lift our chests from the squeeze of it, he tried to teach me another human trick, how to skip a pebble across a still patch of water. I tried. The pebble plopped like a sleepy fish and went down without sentence. He grinned solemnly and tried again himself, and this time the pebble walked 3 steps before it drowned. We applauded like fools, because it was the only applause in Seeonee that did not ask for an oath in exchange. We kept watch in turns. The jackal kept gossip in turns. The tiger kept patience. Akela kept the rock. Bagheera kept his counsel like a coin that would not be spent until the right door appeared. Raksha kept Mowgli's head warm where thoughts had made it cold. I kept the thread of paths in my teeth so that if a chase began at midnight, I could lay it on the ground and make it our road. In towns, when your counsel grows hot and your elder goes thin and the loud men sniff around the door, you do the same things, though you give them other names. You share tea, you check latches, you speak softly to your children. You count the faces that would stand if asked. But we still wonder whether law can hold when its weight rests too long on one weary back. Will a boy's borrowed fire be the brace that keeps the rock from slipping, or the lever that teaches the rock to move? Will a tiger's patience starve before our courage does? I do not know. I know only that the night smelled of fern and iron, and that Mowgli, before sleep took him, pressed a flat, obedient leaf to my ear and said, "This is your council badge, brother," and I wore it until morning. There is a smell the jungle does not make for itself. It is a bright, dry smell, a kind of song that has lost its patience. We call it the red flower, because the mouth of a wolf will not shape the other word without spitting. The night Mowgli carried it in his hand, the forest learned again why we hate the thing and why sometimes we borrow it. He had gone to the village at dusk, when the cattle bells were making their homely circles. He moved as a boy among boys, and the women did not see him because he walked where their errands were louder. He came back with a clay pot, cradling a small, fierce light that ate the twigs it was given and asked politely for more. He set the pot on a flat stone just inside the den, where the breeze cannot gossip. The fire made a quiet throat sound, as if it had manners. Raksha's eyes held the calm of a river that has decided to hold its banks. Father stepped one pace closer to the doorway. I stood between the boy and the pot, because love often chooses the wrong place to stand and must learn the right one. Mowgli looked at us all and said nothing. His face wore the patience of someone who has finally found the handle of a tool and is trying to hold it without pretending to own it. He did not sleep much, None of us did. The pot breathed. The moon shifted. Somewhere far off, a tiger thought with his whole body. At first light, when bees stretch before they remember their chores, Mowgli fed the fire a twig and rehearsed the simple, terrible lesson of cause and effect. He lifted a brand, waited for the tip to brighten, and set it down again. His hands were sure. A boy's sure hands are the bravest and the most dangerous tools in the world. News moves by paw and rumour. By noon the word had spread to the last friendly ear and the first unfriendly one. The council would be held at moonrise. The older wolves gathered their silence and wore it like a cloak. The younger licked their lips as if speeches were meat. Tabaki darted in and out of shade as if he could bite the news itself and taste which side it favoured. Akela mounted the rock when the light was fair and the shadows long enough to hold a memory. He stood steady, and the steadiness cost him. The rings gathered, the law was present. So was the lack of it. Shere Khan did not enter the ring. He came near enough to move the air, then lay in the ravine where his complaints echo best. He did not roar. He breathed. The sound wore our names on its edges. The jackal sat where he could share that breathing without paying rent for it. Some of the younger wolves stood forward, not too close to the rock, not too far from the ravine, their bodies carefully undecided. They spoke of the missed stag, of the need for a fresh voice, of the strangeness of a boy among wolves. They did not look at Mowgli, because to look would be to admit the debt their bellies owed to a panther's old gift. Baloo rumbled a short defence of the law. Bagheera spoke fewer words, and paid instead with a glance that reminded the ring of the bull he had killed on a morning that now felt like a story someone had told to a child for comfort. Raksha did not speak. Mothers do not argue with weather. They make sure the den holds what it must hold when the storm has finished shouting. Then the boy lifted the brand. He had waited. He had listened to talk that would not stop. He had held still as a stalk of grass in a picture. He rose and stepped into the ring. The fire threw a small crown of light over the fur of those nearest him, and made the eyes of the undecided show their truth. He said the law. He said the price Bagheera had paid. He said that a leader's first task is to keep the pack from becoming a mouth for a tiger. He did not shout. The brand did the shouting for him. Shere Khan stood. The grass told us before our eyes did. He came to the edge of the ravine with the slow courage of a creature who believes the story has already been written. He told the pack to give him his prey. He called the boy a man, and therefore his. He named old debts as if the evening were a ledger in need of pen. The boy did not step back. He held the brand where the heat worked, and said a plain sentence that a tiger understands even when he despises grammar. He told him to keep his distance. He told him the red flower was not a story. He wrote his point on the air with a spark that leapt. The brand nicked Shere Khan's whisker and made it singe and curl. That is not a wound to boast of in other circumstances. Tonight it was more than wound enough. The tiger flinched, not at the pain, but at the memory the pain carried. He had known this light in other seasons, and even a lame shoulder can remember at a speed faster than pride. He backed a pace, and then a pace more, his breath folding on itself. The younger wolves, who had never believed anything could move Shere Khan that was not themselves, saw the movement and felt their certainty wobble. Tabaki yipped and found the knight had lost interest in his voice. The boy turned, and his eyes found those who had spoken for the tiger without daring to say his name. He made no threats. He held the brand, and the brand made all the threats necessary. He told them he would not be hunted like a goat. He touched the edge of the council rock with the tip of that fierce flower, and let one small ribbon of smoke write a warning on the stone that has taught us cool for as long as we have had noses to trust it. The smoke said change. The stone said endure. The pack said nothing, which is the most dangerous thing a pack can say. Akela spoke at last. He spoke like a leader who knows he has reached the border where his strength becomes another story's strength. He told the pack that his time on the rock had run its course. He offered his throat according to the law, not to a tiger but to the pack that had once leapt beside him as if distance were a joke. No one moved. No one could count their hunger quickly enough to make it brave. The boy stepped between the old wolf and the old law and laid the brand in a way that made both look at him. He said there would be no killing tonight. He said the law had other sections worth reading. He said he would hold the fire while we found them. I would like to tell you that the pack found courage in a single breath, and that loyalty bloomed like a night flower. What we found was smaller and, for that reason, truer. We found the ability to stand and not pick a side for the space of 10 heartbeats. We found the willingness to let a boy who smelled of man hold a flame and not call him enemy. We found the honesty to see the tiger back away and admit that backing is a kind of answer. That is not triumph, but it is a place where triumph can put a paw. When the circle loosened, Mowgli lowered the brand. He turned toward Raksha first. He stepped close, and the fire's edge kissed her fur and did not burn because the distance between love and hurt can be measured and kept. He told her that he understood now what belonging costs, that he would not make the den pay for his name. He turned to Akela and bowed his boy neck with the ceremony of someone who has read a law and wishes he had not had to. He told him he would not forget how the old wolf had stood. He looked for Bagheera and found the panther looking directly back. Between them went the old payment again, not in coin this time, but in understanding. Then he said the sentence that made the night grow another ring. He said he would go to his people. Not because the pack had thrown him out, because the story had. He would go because a boy must learn what men do when their bowls of light are more than bowls. He would go because if he stayed, the pack would forever be a map of debts with no place left for meat. He would go because he loved us with the kind of love that stops asking a house to change the shape of its doors. We walked with him as far as the lower bend, where the path chooses between the smell of grain and the smell of rain. Raksha touched his cheek. Father said a hunting blessing that struck the ground and lifted without leaving a bruise. Baloo told him to repeat the master words when the day grew narrow. Bagheera did not speak. He placed a paw briefly on the boy's shoulder and let silence be the longest sentence. I went a little farther still, because brothers do not trust crossroads to decide for themselves. At the last turn, he knelt and pressed his forehead to my jaw as if he were a cub again and sleep had come too quickly. He laughed once softly, because we needed the sound. He told me I had the best ears in Seeonee, and that even men would be wiser if they wore such ears for a day. I told him men do wear such ears when they listen with their hearts. It sounded like one of Baloo's sayings, and we both forgave me for it. He lifted the brand and walked toward the bowls of light that hold men's fears. He did not look back. That was mercy for both of us. But we still wonder whether a fire borrowed for justice can ever be set down without setting something else alight. Will the bowl teach him caution or pride? Will the pack remember that a boy's leaving can be an act of love and not only of loss? These are questions that cool slowly, like a stone that has known smoke. We keep them where we keep our oldest lessons, high and dry and reachable in the dark. For your chest, take this small thread of ease. As he vanished into the grain smell, a moth blundered into the last ember on his brand and rose again, amazed to be alive, carrying a speck of light on one wing like a ridiculous badge. Baloo snorted. Bagheera pretended not to see wonder. Raksha and father pressed flanks. I watched until the ember became a thought, and the thought joined the rest. Then I turned back to the cool of the council rock, which did not feel as cool as before, and began the little work of guarding what remained. A village does not smell like a forest. It smells like decisions. Smoke has decided to be tame, grain has decided to be patient, iron has decided to wait until a hand asks it to change shape. I shadowed the thorn fence while the boy walked in without looking back. He carried no brand. Red flour belongs to bowls here, and bowls belong to schedules. Dogs announced him, first by their nostrils, then by their indignation that a stranger smelled of leaf and river. Women looked up from pestles that lifted and fell in a rhythm older than their bracelets. Men measured him with the narrow kindness that spares a lad a beating if he looks useful. She saw him before the rest of them had agreed what he was. Mesua came out from a doorway cut low and straight, the arch blackened by smoke that had learned the path of exit. She had the eyes of one who had been keeping watch on an absence so long it had almost learned to feed her. Her breath caught, made a small sound that quieted the dogs. She said a name that had been waiting on her tongue. Nathu. The boy did not refuse it. He did nothing theatrical. He simply let the name rest on his shoulders as a shawl might. And some shawls keep you warm even when they are not the one you left home with. They brought him inside. If you have never slipped your head beneath a village eave, imagine the smell of earth that has been taught to hold its shape, and the sweet fatigue of oil pressed from seeds with great patience. A small shrine blinked a steady light toward a wall that had decided to be faithful to more than weather. The mortar sounded. It is the sound that says time can be counted without counting. Mesua washed his feet because love needs actions as much as it needs names, and she put food in front of him as if hunger were a story that should never have to introduce itself twice. He ate awkwardly and carefully, trying to trap his wildness in the small courtesies of a bowl. When dusk turned into evening, a man with a moustache like thorn bark and a confidence like a drum came to appraise him. Buldeo, the village hunter, wore the smell of powder and the pride of an old tale told many times to fires that had already guessed the ending. He asked whose cub this was and whose sorrow had decided to be relieved. Messua answered with a softness that nevertheless arranged all the stones where she wanted them. My son. Buldeo grunted a tradition about foundlings and blessings and the tax of fate, then warned the boy in the tone men reserve for those they think will make their boasting cheaper. Mind the cattle, mind the wolves, mind the law of men, which speaks in fines and swats instead of fangs. I kept to the fence, to the hedges of prickly pear, to the backsides of granaries where grain dreams in tall clay bellies. I learned the lanes and the doors that hesitated, and the one roof tile that trembled when a rat laughed. Mowgli's scent Nathus slid over the village like a new rule. He stayed under a light with a wick that did not complain. He slept on a mat that had been taught to forgive elbows. He woke to the sound of water persuaded into pots. He watched with a seriousness wolves use for sky reading. He began to fold his wildness into the grammar of men, and made both better for the folding. On the second day they gave him a small task that would become a large one, the cattle. A boy and a stick are the closest thing the plains have to a law. He took the herd to pasture beyond the last tamarind, where the earth lowers its voice and the wind is old enough to give advice. He moved them with the same attention he had once given to dragonflies. He learned the dialect of hoof and swish, left and right, hurry and rest. He made mistakes and corrected them without theatrical regret. He did not shout at the animals because he did not know how to make his throat cruel. The cattle forgave him for that ignorance. I watched from the far ridge. The village boys walking with him shouted insults at the forest because the forest cannot answer in their words. They called wolves thieves and tigers devils, and boasted of Buldeo's gun as if it were a relative with a familiar temper. Mowgli did not correct them. He kept his mouth for the work. When the herd arranged itself into the slow-moving paragraph that means grass is being taken respectfully, he lifted his eyes, and the look he sent me across the space was a greeting and a report. I am not lost. I am adjusting. The village tested him with small ceremonies. A barber took the jungle from his hair with a blade that had learned humility. A priest marked his brow with a sign that promised favor if he remembered to be grateful. The children taught him a game that involved stones and a square scratched in dust, and he learned to move the pieces without trying to run on all fours between turns. He learned to eat with fingers and not with hunger, to sleep when told and not when the night had decided. He learned to say yes to elders who said foolish things, because elders are allowed that economy. Messua named his days for him: morning rice, afternoon herd, evening hands, night story. She told him the story of her first child, how the jungle had taken him with a kindness that had not asked permission. She told him of the sky when it refuses rain, of the price of salt, of the way a good roof keeps a family from becoming a rumor. He listened with his whole face. He made repairs to her hut that no one asked for. A reed tied where it had sulked free, a pot moved to a less jealous corner. He learned that love in houses shows itself in straight lines and regular sweepings. Buldeo's stories found him, as stories will when a boy begins to carry a stick. The hunter spoke of a tiger that walked with a limp and an insult in his voice. He told of goats taken as if they were taxes, of men frightened in the dusk by a breath that folded them into shadows before their throats could argue. He made the limp sound like arrogance, and the arrogance sound like a right that needed cancelling. He called the tiger the striped devil. Mowgli's face did not change, but when he led the herd the next morning, he counted the calves twice and chose a path with 2 exits and a little more river in it. That evening, Grey Brother, who is always me but sometimes feels like another, brought news to the fence and laid it in the grass, where only a boy who remembers how to re-ground could find it. Shere Khan had been ranging near the low ravine and practicing patience like a craft. His whisker still told the story of fire. His hunger still wrote Shere Khan on the air. I let the grass hold my weight until the village dogs barked themselves hoarse and then gave up, because the night had better things to discuss. Mowgli read the message in the morning with his heel, which drew a faint groove across the tuft where my scent had pressed. He pretended to adjust his sandal. He adjusted his plans. He asked the headman permission to take the cattle toward the gully with the narrow mouth, because the grass there was said to be sweeter. The headman grunted a consent that had more worry than wisdom in it. Buldeo offered 3 warnings and a boast about his gun's opinions. The boy nodded, sincerely grateful for any sound that kept men from noticing how purpose sharpens even a young back. I followed to the edge of the plain where the earth loosens into a fan of gullies. Mowgli walked as a wolf does when a hunt is not yet a hunt. Unhurried, symmetrical, not asking the day to be more than itself. He split the herd when the ground invited it, sending the cows and calves with a smaller boy toward the wide grass and keeping the heavy-shouldered buffalo with himself toward the place where Rock had learned to funnel force. He spoke to them in the low tone that cattle trust, not a command, a suggestion expressed as certainty. They went. The clatter of their horns wrote good grammar on the air. At noon, when shade shrinks like a shy thing, he rested them at water and watched the edges. The ravine slept like a trap with its mouth shut. He did not enter. He marked the places where men could wait and where wolves could wait, and where a tiger might decide the afternoon had made a mistake. He ate the bread Mesua had wrapped in a cloth that smelled of her hands. He drank as a boy and listened as one of us. When the breeze changed, he did not stand. He simply tilted his head and let the news arrange itself inside it. Then he did something that made me love him more and fear for him more. He smiled. Not the smile of a child discovering a new fruit, not the smile of a fool mistaking safety for kindness. The smile of a hunter who has decided to make danger keep an appointment on ground of his choosing. He walked back with the herd in good order and put them away in dust that accepted them. He said nothing that evening. Mesua told him a story and he let it wrap him. Buldeo bragged, and he let the brag pass like a fly that finds no rest. He slept, and his breath wrote a steady sentence under the roof. The village slept badly. Villages do when rumors have been told to the dogs too many times. I kept to the fence. The moon hauled itself over the tamarind, patient as work. Somewhere far off, a tiger thought, and his thought carried the old iron taste of a trap waiting for hooves. Tomorrow, the boy would ask for help without asking. He would borrow wolves without making the village pay interest for our tracks. He would move buffalo like a pen, writes Sudden Truth. The plan was not yet a plan, but the ground had already agreed to it. But we still wonder whether a boy can hold two laws in one body without breaking something tender. Will the name Mesua gave him pull against the name Raksha sang? Will the cowbells in his hands drown the memories of Council Rock or ring them back sharper? We keep these questions where we keep other bright knives, wrapped and reachable. Before sleep found him, he lifted the edge of the reed mat and pushed a crumb toward a patient ant. He said nothing profound. He was simply kind in a way that does not ask applause. In your streets, when a child straightens a shoe at the threshold for no reason at all, the house breathes easier. The hut breathed. The mortar softened its sound. I settled along the fence and watched the corner of the night where plans come from. And there, faintly, the grass bent the way it bends when hooves will run exactly where they ought. A plan ripens the way fruit does when it has decided to be sweet and cannot be argued back into green. At dawn, while the village still measured out its first cups of water, Mowgli walked the street that leads past the cattle pens and looked like any boy sent to a chore. He carried a length of rope that had learned to be useful and the quiet that turns a thought into an instrument. Mesua pressed chapati into his hand and smoothed his hair in the manner of those who have lost a child. Once, and refuse to let the day steal another. He smiled at her with a steadiness that would have told any wolf what he intended. Men do not read steadiness as quickly, and so the village blessed him with ordinary errands. At the pen, he sorted the herd with a patience that did not announce itself. The cows with calves he entrusted to a smaller boy who loved to sing. The heavy-shouldered buffalo he kept, the ones who wear their foreheads like arguments and carry their weight as if gravity had chosen them for apprenticeship. He spoke to them low and plain, the way he had once spoken to bees when he was still practicing respect, and they shifted, snorted, aligned. A stick is a small thing in a boy's hand. It becomes large when a flock of intentions decides to follow it. Grey Brother, who is always I even when running feels like being the wind's brother, waited by the far bend. Akela came, light as a well-kept memory, his ribs honest and his eyes exact. We had agreed our errands without speaking. The ravine that narrows like a throat lay ahead of the pasture, its banks scabbed with old water, its mouth polite toward those who did not need it. Shere Khan had hunted too comfortably near it, letting his lame shoulder guide his patience to where rocks do the work an enemy's teeth might once have done. The ground knew his weight. Today the ground would deliver him to it. Mowgli led the buffalo to the higher lip, where the grass wears a thin shell of dust, and the smell of iron lives in the stones. He sent me with a nod to circle wide and find the tiger's exact omission. Tigers often leave out one small courtesy when they plan. They count men and forget rope. They consider cows and forget buffalo. They trust a ravine to remain a ravine even when a boy has read it as a gate. I found the print with the dragging crescent and the reed bent where whiskers had tasted the air. He was sleeping in complaint, the way he always did after a cowardly kill. Chill the kite drew a narrow loop above the place where the vultures have private opinions. I nodded to the air, and the air nodded back. Akela slipped to the lower lip where the ravine opens into the flat. He would be the door that does not look like a door. I returned to Mowgli and read the question in his eyes. He did not need a long answer. He tied the rope into a simple shape that only looks like magic when the timing is right. Then he gave it to me, and I took it with my mouth, which is how brothers share plans in a country that distrusts paper. He drove the herd forward first as a suggestion. They went in clumps and complaints. Buffalo do not fall in love with ideas. They obey footnotes written by sticks. He made the clumps into a line, and the line into a wedge, and the wedge into a woe-gathering will. Dust lifted around their knees, rose to their shoulders, became a low brown cloud that described intention without shouting. The smaller boy, far off, took his singing herd toward the opposite end of the ravine, because a trap writes a sentence best when it places the period before it begins. Shere Khan woke to a lesson. He lifted his head and tasted buffalo and boy and wolf and plan. He rose with the arrogance of one who has always had time to rise. He moved to where the path had always been kind to him. He found it narrowing. He turned with a swat of tail that would have been majestic if a ravine could be flattered. It could not. Aquila stepped into view below, quiet, alone, sufficient. The tiger's eyes showed their first calculation. He measured the old wolf and found him old. He measured the dust behind and found it growing heavy with decisions. His whiskers remembered fire. His lame shoulder remembered the distance between a leap conceived and a leap paid for. Mowgli raised his arm and the wedge thickened. I took my place along the flank and kept restless horns from confusing themselves with pride. When the first buffalo lowered his head, the second did the same, because imitation is a kind of law. The ravine narrowed again, and the ground taught weight how to be an argument. Shere Khan tried to pass with dignity and found that dignity needs space to work. He turned once, twice, the way a story does when it looks for a better ending and finds the author has already signed the page. There are sounds the jungle remembers without sending them to the birds. The roar he gave was one of them. Not grand, not theatrical, not the hymn of a king. The sound of a striped body discovering that the earth has made its choice. The buffalo came on, not at a run at first, but at that steady push that has broken more gates than anger has. Mowgli moved with them and around them, his stick a thin metronome for a big music. He did not taunt. He did not become the kind of boy who believes he must climb on a back to prove he is brave. He kept the line and the gap and the angle, which is the mathematics of mercy, when mercy is too expensive. Aquila held his ground with all the ease a lifetime of practice grants. He did not need to leap. He needed the tiger to believe there was no longer a leap worth attempting. Shere Khan took 2 paces toward him and 1 away, and that is a confession written in stripes. He veered for the bank. Mowgli marked the moment and cut the herd half a body's width to the left. 1,000 small decisions turn a plan into a fact. Each hoof contributed 1. Dust became blindness. Blindness became a wall. The ravine swallowed the last argument. I will not give you gore. A jungle that sings will not hum a slaughter. I will tell you only that the buffalo filled the space where a question had lived too long, and the question was answered with the heavy consonants of hooves meeting stone. The roar finished in the lowest register. The dust, an honest bureaucrat, settled and filed its report on every surface. When the herd breathing hard, quite satisfied with the world's sense at last, stood as square as house-posts. The ravine kept its new quiet like a rule. Mowgli did what men do when they acknowledge death without wanting it to teach them cruelty. He sent me to watch the mouths of the gullies for jackal or hyena, who might make mischief of our work. He soothed the buffalo with the same tone he had used in the morning, which is a lesson about consistency that your cities forget. He went down with the rope. He did not sing. He did not claim. He worked. Later, there would be a skin and a tail, and Buldeo would arrive with a mouth that had been practicing applause for itself. For now, there was only the quiet confirmation that a debt had ended. Akela climbed to me and pressed his muzzle briefly to my cheek. It was not triumph. It was inventory. We counted the breaths that still belonged to us. We counted the dangers that had just learned to pick another road. We counted, in the added space that comes when a tyrant is removed, the small things that might now grow. A cub's lesson spoken without glancing at the ravine. A hunt undertaken without the sour weight of a lame shadow nearby. A counsel that might remember the old posture. Mowgli stood a long while and looked at the place where the striped patience had ended. He was not proud, not sad, not in love with his own cleverness. He was something rarer in boys and in men. He was exact. He had read the ground and turned its grammar to our defense. He had borrowed the strength of dull, loyal animals and returned it to them without stealing their dignity. He had done what the law asks when it stops being song and becomes tool. For the light in your chest, here are two small pictures. A calf too young for sense thought. The dust cloud was a new kind of game, and chased his own tail until he toppled onto his knees and stared, offended, at the ground for having a rule about knees. Mowgli laughed, the easy kind, and rubbed the little pole between the ears until the insult forgave itself. And later, while he sat on a flat rock to drink the water Messua had given him, a frog placed its round weight on his bare foot as if confirming ownership. He accepted the seal with solemnity and then wiggled his toes to make the frog's mind up for it. The frog blinked twice, then stayed. And for a minute the world pretended everything was that simple. We took the herd home in good order. The village met them with the usual accusations of lateness and the usual relief that makes lateness unimportant. Buldeo, sensing a story arriving without him, adjusted his moustache into heroism and began to ask the kind of questions that are not really questions. He would have his hour, and the skin would later become more than leather. But that is another scene. Tonight, the air smelled less of iron and more of cooked grain. Messua's lamp held its small disk of approval at the door. Mowgli stepped into it and allowed himself the luxury of letting someone else smooth his hair. But we still wonder whether a victory arranged with such clarity can keep a boy from believing that clarity belongs to him. Will the ground always offer its grammar when he asks for it? Or will there be a day when a plan comes apart like dry grass, and he must learn another kind of courage? Will the pack remember that a tiger's end is a beginning only if we share the work of what comes next? I cannot answer yet. I can tell you that the night lay down well, and the stars seemed to approve, and the ravine, now innocent of stripes, resumed the honest task of teaching water where to go. When sleep came to the village, the dogs forgot to snarl at the hedge. I lay at the fence, with my nose on my paws, and felt, for the first time in many nights, the absence of a particular weight from the air. It is a strange comfort, the comfort of subtraction. You do not cheer, you count again and find your number smaller, but smaller can be safer. Smaller can be sufficient, and in that sufficiency, a boy who had walked 2 laws in one body closed his eyes and rested as if both laws had agreed for an evening to keep watch together. Vengeance is loud, gratitude is housekeeping. After the ravine had given back its quiet, the village did the thing villages do when a story returns without the proper signatures. Buldeo made verbs out of his moustache and nouns of his boasts. He walked the lane with the tiger's skin folded into a speech, and placed Mowgli Nathu for their comfort in the margin of his own paragraph. It might have ended there, with bragging poured into bowls until it cooled. But bragging is a solvent. It loosens other tongues. In 2 nights the talk slid from glory to suspicion, from hunter's tale to witch tale. Messua's kindness became a plot in certain mouths, and the boy's forest sense became a proof that no one had requested. I kept to the hedge and listened to fear taking minutes. It knows how. First, the old story of a lost child returned by powers that do not ask the headman's permission. Then, the way his feet seem to know paths cattle only guess. Then, the woman who keeps a shrine that does not burn wrong and a lamp that never forgets. The words gathered tinder. Buldeo, who liked his audience pious and jumpy, fanned them. By the time the moon had climbed, the plan was an old one. Bind the dangerous mercy before it makes the crops forget to ripen. They called it justice because men like their fear to wear a uniform. Grey Brother, who is my name when the world needs errands. Dun took the news to Mowgli in the hush behind Messua's hut. He was mending a hole in the thatch, as if mending could save anyone from a decision already gathered in the lanes. He went still. Stillness simplifies choices. He looked to the door, where the woman and her husband counted breath and hope against each other. And then to the hedge, where the village dogs were practicing outrage. He said very little. He sent me for Akela. We do not batter doors when a quiet pressure will teach them better manners. We waited until the lane filled with men who had gathered courage from each other's elbows. They carried ropes and torches that smoked shame. A priest held words in his mouth that once had been prayers and tonight were a kind of lockpick. When they pushed the bar, Mowgli's hand found mine in the dark. Not to borrow strength, but to divide it properly. He told the woman to be ready to walk where feet do not usually go. She tied a scarf twice and called her husband by a name she had not used since their courtship. Small courtesies make a corridor through panic. Akela came like a thought you had forgotten you were brave enough to think. 2 more of the pack held the lane's blind corners. The men did not know what they saw at first, only that shadow had grown a voice, and the voice belonged to a craft older than torches. The bravest shoved the door wide. Torches made their clumsy crowns on the threshold. We moved in the space between breath and shout. I took the priest's sleeve and invited him to change his mind by placing him gently on his back. Akela's teeth lifted the bar as a man lifts a reed to test its straightness. Mowgli opened the bolt that Fright had forgotten to remember. Messua took 1 step and then another, and her husband, who was brave in the way of men who have learned it late, followed her shadow. We left a courtesy behind. Wild things are not vandals. But Mowgli emptied the cattle pen into the lane with a whistle you would recognize if you've ever watched water find a gutter. Hooves question authority very quickly. The herd broke the town into puzzles. Men who had been certain now had to choose between being stepped on and reconsidering their zeal. Torches went sideways, then out. A boy with a stick became a law more practical than a shout. We slid through the narrowest part of the confusion, carrying no pride and 2 human lives. Beyond the hedge, the night cooled. The thorn fence gave us its last scratch as receipt, and the fields widened into a sentence we knew how to finish. Bagheera waited at the tamarind, where he dislikes waiting but likes finishing better. Baloo, who had promised Raksha only to watch from a distance, came nearer than the promise and called it interpretation. Together we made the sort of procession men tell as a legend. Later, because legends remove the embarrassing number of small, necessary choices. In truth, it was plain work. Gait chosen to favour the weaker ankle, pauses chosen for breath, not poetry. Water found when the throat insisted. Mesua did not talk, which kept us swift. Once, when a root lifted out of the path as if to offer an opinion, she stumbled and apologized to the forest. I liked her for that. Her husband prayed under his breath in a rhythm that made good walking music. Mowgli spoke to them sparingly, with the voice you use when teaching someone to put their feet into another kind of grammar. Step here. Wait. Now. Quiet. He did not say, do not look back. He knew they would. He arranged the path so that what they saw, if they turned, was the bank of night and not the face of pursuers. At the first stream, he told them the story. Water loves. We are of one blood, ye and I. He adapted it for human ears, the tune softened, the courtesy sharpened. The jungle listened and let us pass. An owl pressed its round opinion into the dark, and then forgave us for not being mice. Even Kaa's old memory lifted its head in the bamboo, and then lay down again, deciding that some flights belong to the ground. We did not go straight to Council Rock. Men have not earned that path. We took the rings around it, teaching their feet the slope and the rubble, the coolness that means shade with a welcome, the coolness that means snake. The teaching was not only for tonight, it was a promise in Mowgli's throat that if they ever had to run again, they would not do it as strangers to the necessary stones. Mesua learned quickly. Her husband learned as men do who have always paid attention to roofs, but not to leaves, with gratitude that tastes like regret, in a hollow where the trees quilt night softly. We stopped long enough for breath to negotiate peace with fear. Baloo found honey on a low branch and left it there because sweetness can make tired legs foolish. Bagheera went a little wide to watch what watched us. Akela counted the wind. I stood with my shoulder against Mowgli's shoulder and felt how the narrowness of his bones contained more steadiness than some rocks. The woman looked at him, then, as if trying to reconcile 2 names upon one child. She smiled a small thing, made of tears that had chosen not to fall, and told him softly that he walked like a memory and stood like a promise. He blushed, which is human, and he bowed his head, which is wolf. We set them finally on a ledge of stone that keeps its cool, because it loves shade more than applause. There they would be found at dawn by men less interested in burning than in bargaining, woodcutters who know the price of a clean saw, shepherds who respect any creature that can bring a herd home by sound alone. The jungle cannot keep men. It can hide them long enough for better men to find them. Mowgli placed in Messua's hand a loop of vine tied in the simple knot that means, "Pull this and I will come." She understood it was not magic. She understood it was exactly magic enough. We went back by a path we did not make to look like a path. The village had settled into that guilty quiet that follows a fire that did not catch. Buldeo rehearsed new versions of his boast, in case the morning demanded a different ending. The priest rubbed his bruised dignity and considered a sermon on prudence. The headman counted torches and found the number unsatisfactory. Dogs slept because work had been done that they could not tidy with their noise. We were not seen. We rarely are when we choose not to be. Mowgli stood a long time beside the hedge where he had learned to divide his breath between two worlds. He had just rescued the best pieces of the village from the worst, and the arithmetic of that tenderness hurt him. He would not say it. I felt it in the way his hand did not reach for my ear, and in the way he watched the door where the lamp still kept a circle for a son who had walked into the dark. He did not belong there any longer. He belonged nowhere simple. That is a kind of belonging too, and a difficult one. To lighten your chest, hold this. As we slipped past the granary, a civet nosed the rim and sneezed. Astonished at the pepper some careful woman had dusted there against thieves. The sound was so offended, so prim, that even Bagheera's whiskers smiled. Mowgli's laugh came in a small, clean bell, and the night answered without echo, which is how forests applaud. But we still wonder whether saving a kindness from a crowd teaches a boy mercy or solitude. Will he carry the village as an ache or as a lesson? Will Messua's shawl warm him years from now, when choices bite with colder teeth? I do not know. I know that dawn found the couple alive, and in debt to no one unworthy. I know that our den was waiting with Raksha's silence and father's practical pride, and I know that when Mowgli lay down at last, his breath took the shape of a law older than men's ropes and kinder than their fires. We are kept by the ones we keep. Some doors open inward only for those who do not want what waits behind them. That morning began with ordinary business. Scent lines to be checked, a path to be mended where rain had torn it, a lesson from Baloo that tried to be about berries and ended, as always, about restraint. Then Bagheera came with the kind of quiet that tells you the news is not urgent but is old, which is stranger. He twitched one whisker toward the south, where stone remembers names and vines forget them. And Mowgli, alert to that grammar, set his feet toward cold lairs. I followed because brothers follow questions. We went in under arches that imitate shade badly. The monkeys had left their chatter here. It floats even after their bodies have found a new mistake. Bagheera threaded the corridors as if he owned the place and had merely lent it to history. Mowgli touched the walls the way he touches trees when he greets them, palm flat, without greed. He did not love the smell old heat, old promises, a tired perfume of men who had once believed they could weigh the sun, if only they stacked their coins high enough. The room found us before we found it, a chamber with a mouth of black and teeth of fallen stone. The air there is cooler, not because it is kind, but because it is finished with burning. The treasure did not glitter as tales say. It lay like a sick river that has learned shine without learning clean. Ivory slept in piles. Bronze blinked under dust. Jewels pretended to be berries no bird would eat twice. And in the centre, guarding not the wealth, but the memory of guarding, a white cobra lifted his head and spoke with the dry patience of those who have spent their lives speaking to wrong ears. He called himself king, then warden, then only keeper. Titles sloughed off him like old skin. His eyes were opal, not from jewels, but from time. He asked what we wanted. Mowgli said nothing at first. Bagheera, who has sharper manners than he admits, offered the courtesy of names and the longer courtesy of silence after the names. I kept to the rim and breathed shallow, because the air itself seemed to scold. The cobra told his story the way rain tells a drought, by continuing. He spoke of men who had poured their hunger into metal until metal learned to mirror it back. He spoke of an elephant goad, a tool whose point is a lesson and whose jewels are a lie. He said it lay there, careless among crowns that had forgotten heads. Mowgli stepped forward because a boy must, and because curiosity is not the enemy of virtue, only its untrained cousin. He picked up the ankus. It was not heavy. That is the worst thing about certain tools. They enter the hand without demanding respect. The iron point was cold and practical. The handle wore a crust of red and green stones, set in gold, that had tried to be immortal and had succeeded only in dullness. The boy turned it, weighing not the metal, but the meaning. Bagheera watched with the old understanding that men make tools that then make men. The cobra urged him to put it down. His voice had more warning in it than venom. He was not guarding the trinkets. He was guarding us from the story, that the trinkets always demand we repeat. He told of blood spilled by those who had argued about this very goad, of bodies that had lain as receipts for a small luxury no one had needed. He spoke with contempt of kings who believed elephants must be taught pain in order to remember greatness. Mowgli listened and did what is hardest for boys who are equal parts human and honest. He believed, and yet he kept the object. Not to own it. To test whether a story can be refused by being carried without wanting. We left the chamber with the ankus wrapped in the corner of a cloth Bagheera had carried for shade. The monkeys melted away from our path, their clever hands drawn and repelled by the thing's promise. Outside, the light felt cleaner, which is another way of saying the palace had been a lesson and the sky forgave us for attending it. I trotted beside Mowgli and asked the question without words. He answered with the answer that tried to be two answers. He said he would give the thing to no one who would suffer for having it. He said he would keep it only as long as it took to be sure. On the lower path we met a man with eyes like flies on molasses. He smiled hard at the cloth in Mowgli's hand and softened his voice as if kindness could pick locks. He talked of buying and of temples, and of how kingship is a kind of charity if the jewels are bright enough to make the poor feel included. Mowgli said nothing. He walked past, and the smile became a knife someone else would have to hold later. At the river we met another, and another. Word had travelled faster than pause. Greed is a bird that always knows the shortest cut. We climb to the ridge to breathe where wind writes larger truths. Bagheera set the ankus on a stone and watched it the way you watch a sleeping snake you do not intend to harm. Mowgli sat and scraped an old thorn from his heel. He looked at the tool not as treasure, not even as temptation, but as a question. Who becomes smaller around such a thing? He asked me whether wolves ever argue over bones they cannot eat. I told him yes, when hunger grows in the head and not in the belly. He nodded and stood. We decided to leave the ankus where no man who desired it would find it, and no child who did not understand would be hurt by it. That is a narrow place to discover. Mowgli carried it into a tangle of thorn and stone above a pool that looks shallow and is not. He wedged it into a crevice and covered it with 2 palm-sized rocks that belonged there as convincingly as any forethought can belong in a wild place. Then we left. It was a clean leaving, the kind you wish would finish a story. It did not finish. Men followed, the ones whose eyes had counted jewels from a distance. They found the place we had paused for water, the place we had drawn breath under a tamarind, the place where Bagheera had stood too long and left the print a cat leaves when thinking. They quarrelled. The ankus did what the cobra had promised it would do. It wrote a quick, bloody ledger in the dust, using hands that hoped to be exceptions. We did not watch. We learned by absence. Vultures told us what had happened in the shorthand they prefer. The air gave back the acrid aftertaste of steel used badly. Bagheera's whiskers settled lower. Mowgli's shoulders did not. At dusk, the boy went back, alone, except for me and the patience Bagheera lends him. He retrieved the ankus with a face that had chosen not to write judgment. He carried it to the deepest bend of a stream that eats secrets as work and drops them in a cavern where only fish debate. He looked at me once, not for permission, but for company, and then he let it go. The jewelled handle shone foolishly for a heartbeat, and then became nothing at all, smaller than a leaf's shadow. Water resumed its proper job of not remembering. He stood a while and let the failure wash off that had not been his. Bagheera came up and did not speak. The forest approved in its quiet ways. A breeze small enough to disturb only the topmost leaves. A late bee changing its mind. A miner imitating someone else's alarm and then discovering no one needed it. We walked home, close without touching. Raksha looked him over and saw no wounds but the kind that quarrel with the idea of ownership. Baloo grunted a proverb about toys and teeth and stopped before the last line, because the last line would have been smug, and this day had earned no smugness. To ease your chest, here are 2 small mercies. On the way back, Mowgli found a snail stranded on a dry rock and moved it 2 hands' widths to dampness, asking it politely to change its address. The snail extended its horns like a prince reconsidering exile and accepted the neighborhood. And later, as we lay by the den, mouth watching slow stars, I felt a light weight behind my ear. He had tucked a dull pebble there, grey and perfect. As an answer that does not need jewels, I kept it. But we still wonder whether setting a dangerous thing free of our hands frees our thoughts, or whether the thought keeps a copy of the weight just in case. Will he, years from now, feel the ghost of that goad when he holds any tool that promises more than its use? Will he trust himself to walk away before the river must do it for him? I do not know. I know only that he slept without flinching, and that the white cobra in his broken court lifted his head to no audience and was content, for one night to have been right. The first sign was not a print, but a punctuation bark spattered along a hard path where no pack of decent wolves would waste voice. Dole talk is a red scribble in the air, impatient and unanimous. 2 evenings before they came, the langurs stared too long at the southern horizon and forgot to scold us for nothing. The deer gathered close under trees that could not possibly save them. Even the bees worked lower, as if measuring their stores against a storm they did not like to name. Bagheera read the ridge with one glance, and said the word that pulls bellies tight. Red dog. Doles do not invade, they arrive. 50, 60, more moving like a single argument that has already won. They do not boast like Bandar Log or stalk like Shere Khan. They flow. Mowgli listened and did not smile. He had known the weight of one tiger. Now he weighed the weight of many small hungers braided into certainty. Akela, already thin with honest years, stood beside him like a spear that has been sharpened too often but still refuses to be club. We did not have the luxury of new ideas. The old plan had teeth because it had been learned with wounds. Bagheera's whisker tilted toward the bee rocks by Waingunga, where the cliff keeps warm even in shade, and the little people keep counsel tight. If we could draw the red dogs along the hot slabs and wake the bees into disciplined fury, the swarm would beat the pack into the river, and the river would remember how to be a weapon. The plan is cruel, only if you forget the alternative. To borrow the little people, we first had to ask them in their grammar. Baloo rehearsed the words with Mowgli at the pool until the air itself seemed to hum in approval. The master words are old. The bee words are older. You do not order bees. You invite them to discover what they already disapprove of. I ran the lower paths to make certain the red dogs were not lying to us with their noise. They were honest in the way floods are honest. They had crossed the old trail at the bamboo, killing nothing because nothing had dared be in their way. Night brought Kaa to the cool lip above the bee rocks, a long deliberate line laid over stone. He had scars on his memory from a Dole season you would prefer not to imagine. He listened to Bagheera's plan without flattery. Mowgli spoke the request with a boy's courtesy sharpened into a ranger's brevity. The python's tongue tasted the drift of iron from the river below and the fat, warm syllables of bees above. He nodded once, which is how mountains say yes, and slid down to watch the lower channel, where the first bodies would fall. We set the lures. Wolves do not leave signs for fools to follow. We place the right insult where confidence likes to walk. Akela and I drifted near their flank just long enough to be seen and not caught. We let them hear the laugh that is not laugh, and the pad that is not haste. Doles hate being ignored. We gave them a dignified quantity of indifference. Mowgli, ahead of us all, streaked the bee rocks with a faint ribbon of wild honey-one taste in 100 places until the scent wrote impatience on the stone. The little people woke, not angry yet, only ready for the meeting that their bodies are built to hold. At dawn, the red dogs came in a red sheet. Their leader's tail flagged the sun, and their mouths stitched one long sentence. Everything between here and there belongs to our noise. They were beautiful, the way fire is beautiful when no roofs are near. Bagheera paced the slope above with that insulting ease that makes enemies run where you wish. Baloo was nowhere seen. He had gone lower to count the moment when river and cliff and swarm would agree on consequence. I kept my breath in my ribs and my eyes everywhere Mowgli was not, which is how brothers do arithmetic when pride would prefer multiplication. The first bee touched Adole's brow and went away with its opinion delivered. The pack flinched at the wrong thing, not the sting, the discipline. Bees striking together make an argument wolves admire and dholes misunderstand. Mowgli sang the bee words soft and steady, a chant with no brag in it, and the air thickened like news going bad. The swarm tipped first a curtain, then a wall, and the red dogs lost rhythm. They still came, because they are built to come, but not in that perfect line that makes fear go cheap. A dozen peeled toward the path where I laid my noise, and I let them see the grey back of a wolf who knows the next corner better than they ever will. We bled them along the sun-hot slabs until panting began to sound like thinking. Then Mowgli took the path only bare feet can trust, cut across the last tilted plate, and stood where the ledge narrows to the lip above Waingunga. His hands were open. His mouth kept the bees polite. His eyes counted the heads the way a headman should, and a boy rarely does. "Here," he said, in the old talk that is partly hum and partly invitation. The swarm obeyed no one and answered everything. It poured. The red dogs broke. You know the river's music at Bee Rocksit sucks and chuckles, and then, when a body finds the boil, it says a low word. That is not a word at all. 10, 20 went over, legs bicycling in surprise, mouths clamped on a story that no longer needed them. 50 more bunched on the tongue of rock where the spray wants to be missed and loses its temper. Bagheera made the mistake he meant to, a slow, elegant slip that lured a knot of them toward the slickest seam. They came as if drafted. He vanished into certainty and reappeared with a red ear in his teeth and an old cut reopening across his shoulder. The leader learned late. He gathered what remained of his choir and leapt for the only sensible ground left, the very notch where Akela had been waiting with his patience arranged into angles. The old wolf did not sing. He bit. Then it was all noise at once, the kind you do not tell children, and the kind children overhear anyway when the village walls lean too close. I took a throat and earned a stripe of red that was not mine. Mowgli's knife flicked and was forgotten. Hands and feet fought like animals who remember tools as a second language. The bees made everything fair by stinging without rank or grudge. When the water took the last certainty from the red dogs, silence arrived the way a canopy does when a storm remembers manners. We stood counting loss. Bagheera bled with elegance and impatience. Baloo breathed great millstone breaths and told the bees thank you in his ruinous accent. Kaa lifted his head from the lower pool and announced in that flat way of his that the river had eaten what it could and would not ask for seconds. I turned and found Akela, lying as if listening to a lesson he had meant to teach himself. Mowgli knelt and put his forehead to the old head. Akela's eyes were as clear as cold water. He was not surprised. Leaders never are when the bill arrives for a feast they ordered seasons ago. He spoke low, little words with big jobs. Good, law, stand, run, remember. He said, the pack is a story told true when the meat is scarce. He said, a boy's feet must learn paths no counsel rock has names for. He said, Mowgli's name in the tone mothers use when they sing and fathers use when they count. The breath changed shape and then stopped asking for shape at all. We lay beside him until the bees, satisfied, drowsed back into their neat gold thoughts. Bagheera cleaned the old wolf's face with 2 ceremonial strokes. Baloo sat like a shrine that has nothing to guard, but will not abandon its post. Mowgli did not cry loudly. Water came and went in his eyes like a tide that respects property lines. He spoke a little to Akela's silence. I will not tell you the words. Some sentences belong exactly once to a mouth and a night and a rock. For your breathing, keep these smaller pictures. In the sudden quiet, a bee landed on Mowgli's thumb and inserted its tongue with bureaucratic courtesy to request salt. He let it drink, and when it finished, it patted his skin as if stamping a document. And later, as we lifted Akela to a shade that had earned dignity, a miner misjudged the solemnity of things and shouted an alarm at a leaf. Bagheera rolled one eye at the universe, and the universe accepted the correction. But we still wonder whether victory earned with so many correct decisions can comfort a boy holding the last quiet of his first leader. Will the river's justice teach him the mercy of planning, or only the habit of winning? Will the pack, cleaned of red dogs, remember the gentler law Akela stood on, or only the sharp one he died under? I cannot answer. I know only that evening found us lighter by one great weight and heavier by an absence, and that Mowgli, walking home with red dust drying on his shins, stepped as if the ground had taught him a softer grammar to carry beside the hard. When night finally folded the bee rocks, the little people hummed a sleep that even grief could borrow. We took the path that avoids the thorn that always catches smugness. The river below returned to the work of untangling stars, and on the ridge, where the wind counts names without speaking them, I heard Akela's once more and let it settle in my fur, like a law that does not need to be recited to be obeyed. Spring does not arrive. It discovers you. It finds the hinge in your chest and pushes lightly until all the doors hear. After the red dogs were folded back into the river and Akela's name began to live in the wind, the forest changed its walk. Sap spoke louder. Bees worked as if honey were an argument they wanted to win kindly. Even the stones warmed at noon in a way that invited paws to loiter. Mowgli felt it first as impatience with paths he himself had taught to be exact. His feet, once content with the grammar of the hunt, began to ask for metaphors. We call it the spring running. The birds say it with percussion. The deer say it by forgetting the old treaty of caution for 3 foolish heartbeats at dusk. Wolves say it by ranging farther than a good map would recommend, and then returning as if chastened by a private joke. Mowgli breathed in the new air and could not settle. He laughed and frowned in the same afternoon. He took the ridge twice when once would have fed the question. He slept and woke as if sleep were a place to try on and not a home. Baloo, who has felt many springs and forgiven most of them, tried a lesson to anchor him, a short chant about berries, a longer one about patience. Mowgli listened with his head and not with his bones. Bagheera watched and did that eyelid thing which is not a blink, but a curtain lowered for a difficult scene. Kaa warmed himself on a flat stone and tasted the breeze with a tongue that remembers 1,000 springs and respects each of them for the trouble they intend. Raksha said little and counted breaths. I kept to Mowgli's shadow, because even a restless shadow still belongs to the body it trusts. He said the forest was too small. Then he said it was too large. He called for a run at dawn, and found the run could not outrun what was pacing him. He greeted the bees and forgot the second flourish, and then laughed at his own forgetting. He stood in Wine-gunga up to his knees, and let the current lift his calves, and still the current was not the thing he wished to answer. If you have ever stood in a room you built yourself, and found the door opening inward toward a street that never learned your name, you know his frown. One evening Bagheera brought meat and no lectures, and laid it down as if feeding a guest who might soon be living somewhere else. Spring asks a question, his whiskers wrote. Answer it in the right direction. He did not say which direction that was. He has learned to spare nouns when a boy's heart is arguing with itself. Baloo tried a story about a cub who thought wandering would fix his hunger and returned wiser. But even the ending felt like a belt, tightened one hole too many. Mowgli listened politely and then rose at a sound none of us could pretend not to hear. A human voice singing to her pitcher at a well. You know the scene because the jungle kept it for you. The village lay where grain teaches patience and smoke remembers to go up. A girl came to the well with bangles practicing sunlight, and a gate that had learned to make watching feel like consent was already given. She saw Mowgli standing at the edge of fields that are not kind to bare feet, and tilted her head so that the water in her eyes shone in a language he did not yet know. She let the pitcher slip on purpose, and scolded it as if it were a goat that had kicked at courtesy. The ring of clay on stone was the most deliberate sound of the season. He stepped forward because he is built to help. Wolves rescue with teeth and speed. Boys rescue with hands and the willingness to be seen. He lifted the pitcher and she let him. He carried it the short distance that unthreads a life from one loom and dresses it on another. Messua looked from the doorway where a silk of smoke draws family into a line, and saw not a stranger, but the outline of a name her mouth had learned to keep warm. She did not call him in. She arranged the threshold so that being outside tasted like being halfway home. We did not follow close. Wolves do not intrude on the grammar of houses. We kept to the tamarind and the low hedge where dogs waste anger. I watched his shoulders change shape around the pot. He walked less like a hunter and more like someone learning to carry a promise. The girl spoke a small sentence to the water that was all invitation and no pressure. The men at the corner pretended to discuss rope. When he set the pitcher down, the well cord had already wound around his hands in a pattern older than hunting. He came back to us with a look that is not shame and not triumph. It is the look of a cliff learning that the sea has been writing it a letter for years. The spring running moved in him with purpose. He sat and said nothing, and then said too much, and then said the right amount. The village breathes in squares, he said finally, and my breath knows those corners. He rubbed his forearm as if a new name had laid a warm weight there and wanted to be sure of the fit. That night the jungle tuned itself to his walking. Paths made themselves obvious and then lost heart. The pool reflected a face already rehearsing a different light. Baloo snored with extra dignity, which is how elders help a room decide it is safe to change. Bagheera went hunting alone and returned with meat and an unoffered opinion. Raksha pressed flank to flank and said nothing aloud while saying everything a mother can say with warm silence. I lay so close his shoulder touched my ribs the way a cub's does when he is almost done being a cub. At first light he ran, but not as we run when we test our lungs against ridges. He ran as if carrying news to himself. He took the old salt lick, the narrow notch above the fig where langurs practice judgment, the long curve that returns to the lower path where fireflies rehearse lantern duty. At each turn his feet softened. He stepped around the fern he used to crash through to make me laugh. He paused where Akela had once stood as posture and let his chin learn that angle. He watched the place where Shere Khan had been a patience in stripes and did not lengthen his stride to look brave. Spring had not made him foolish. It had made him exact in new ways. By noon he spoke the sentence we all knew was coming and none wished to hear first. I will go. He did not argue himself into bravery. He simply placed the words between us as one places a bowl. Bagheera touched his forehead with a paw and said the old account was paid and the new account would be kinder if he kept it small. Baloo tried to make a proverb kind enough to last 3 winters and broke it into hugs instead. Kaa lifted his head from the half-sun and gave him the kind of nod you give to someone who will one day need to borrow your memory again. Raksha licked his cheek once, a full deliberate stroke that tasted of every moon the den had kept him. I walked him to the edge where grain begins and leaf ends. The air there argues softly about what belongs to whom. He carried nothing in his hands because the hands needed to learn how to ask, and not only how to take. He carried everything in his back because a back remembers better than a bag. We stood where the path looks both ways equally well. He put his forehead to mine, and I breathed the boy and the man and the spring and the winter to come. He laughed once to break the ache and called me the steward of sensible paths. I told him the sensible ones were his to invent now. He went down toward the well that sings when clay kisses water. The girl stood again with her pitcher and the shyness that can break kingdoms more cleanly than swords. Messua waited with a shawl that had decided to be a welcome rather than a claim. A dog barked and then wagged because wagging pays better. He did not look back. I keep saying that because it matters. When a leaving is right, it does not ask the forest to bless it twice. We stayed until the light chose roofs over leaves. Bagheera came to stand at my shoulder, because loneliness shared is a food that stretches. Baloo arrived later and pretended to be searching for medicinal plants until the pretending grew heavy. Raksha and father returned to the den and left the mouth of it open as if the night itself were a guest they hoped would step in and decline to leave. Kaa remained on his stone and hummed something so old even silence nodded. To slacken the knot in your chest, hold these small images. On the way back from the hedge, I startled a quail that rose like a shaken thought, and then changed her mind and settled exactly where she had been, as if the right place to be had revealed itself in flight. And near the pool, a dragonfly discovered its reflection and practiced agreeing with it, until the breeze convinced them both to move on. But we still wonder whether a heart that has learned 2 grammars can speak either without an accent. Will the village teach him tenderness that hunts less and forgives more? Or will it ask him to hide the part of himself that keeps laws older than fire? Will the pack remember that loving someone sometimes means walking with them only to the border and not 1 step farther? I do not know. I know that Spring had chosen a new name for him, and that he answered, and that the forest being old and honest made room. Summer wore itself thin and then forgot to complain. Paths I had mapped with Mowgli's heel beside mine began to close with polite grass. A den remembers its missing weight by adjusting the shape of its silence. Raksha moved as mothers move when love has nothing left to argue, and everything left to keep warm. Father hunted the long, clean arcs that help a body think. Baloo taught with the same old patience, minus 1 listener who had once turned every proverb into a practical question. Bagheera brought meat and no comment, which is his way of saying he misses what he refuses to grieve noisily. I ran the lower paths and the high ones, and when the wind was exactly right, I could taste on it flower dust and lamp smoke, the tidy courage of human days. From the ridge, I sometimes watched the village shrink and brighten by turns, a necklace of small obediences. Once, toward dusk, I saw him no longer boy small, not yet indifferent to wonder carry 2 pitchers at once, while a girl with bracelets walked close enough for her laughter to steady the load. Mesua stood in the doorway with a shawl that had learned a new weight. A dog chased a fly for the pleasure of losing. It was all so nearly nothing that it became everything. I did not call. Wolves do not break the grammar of houses. I let the picture settle where my ribs hold steady things. The pack adjusted in the practical ways that honour grief. We mended the path where the red dogs had scrawled their hurry. We taught new cubs the ordinary ceremony to show a throat in play and not in surrender. How to listen for bees before the tongue forgets its manners at water. Akila's name lived in the wind. That is not poetry, it is a direction. When the moon set just so, young wolves would pause without meaning to, and stand the way he had stood, and then go on with the business of meat and mistakes, which is how remembrance earns its keep. Kaa basked on his page of stone, and let age be the dignity it rarely gets to be. He spoke few sentences, and each one had already survived 3 versions of the world. Baloo found a new chant about figs that turned secretly into a lesson on fairness. Bagheera perfected the art of arriving exactly when a cub's overconfidence needed to be gently taxed. The bees kept their ledgers. Even the monkeys behaved for 3 afternoons in a row, which is a miracle the jungle, being kind, did not remark upon. Once news came on the legs of Chill. A man in the village had told a story of an old tiger felled by clever buffalo and a cleverer boy, and the story had grown rounder and less exact, as stories do when they're asked to carry comfort more than truth. I asked the wind whether Mowgli Nathu, if that kept the bowls full and the doors friendly, had let the tale stand. The wind answered with the faintest laugh, and the smell of a mat shaken outside at daybreak. Men keep what they need and correct what they can bear to correct. Wolves do the same. We call it the law and pretend the pretending is enough. I visited the cold lairs once, alone, because solitude has errands. The white cobra slept in his broken court, guarding nothing and everything. Sun turned gold to foolishness in a dozen corners. I said no words that might wake old greed. On the way back, a miner scolded me for stepping on the particular patch of dust it had been planning to admire, and I apologized, because apology, offered rightly, costs less than pride imagines. At Waingunga, the bee-rocks wore their history with the modesty of clean stone. A single bee tested my ear and approved my salt. Even grief, I thought, can be domesticated into gratitude if we keep it busy enough. To ease your chest, 2 light things. A porcupine lost a quill in my path, and then tried to look as if he had meant to gift it. I accepted with solemn ceremony, and he waddled off satisfied, looking back twice to ensure the exchange had been recorded properly. Later, a dragonfly settled on Bagheera's nose. He went cross-eyed with imperial offence until the insect lifted away, at which point the panther pretended the whole incident had added lustre to his legend. Seasons do not ask permission to repeat. Rains came with their patient handwriting. Dry followed like an honest bill. Cubs became yearling. Yearlings discovered arrogance. Arrogance bumped its head and learned the soft step again. In all that movement a small, steady thread held. Sometimes near evening, when the field edges soften and the dogs choose wagging over warnings, I would hear him. Not words I could carry, only the cadence of a man speaking kindly in a courtyard, the sound of a pot set down with care, a child's question answered without haste. The jungle, which resents walls and forgives them anyway, allowed the hearing as a favour paid in both directions. There were nights, few but honest, when I wished him back, not to undo his leaving, which had been right, but to let the den remember what it had done well. On those nights Raksha would lay her head across my paws and remind the cave with her weight that love does not require an audience. Father would yawn, the old obedient yawn, and refuse to get up for an ache that could not be hunted down. Bagheera would arrive, set meat at the door, and depart with the dignity of shadow doing its first work. Baloo would snore something that sounded like an argument settled in our favour, and the bees, even in sleep, would hum the one verdict they trust: enough, enough, enough. But we still wonder whether a creature who has learned 2 grammars can keep both from quarrelling when storms test the roof. Will the law of men, with its fines and festivals, remember to bow to the older law that keeps teeth from wasting themselves? Will the law of the jungle, with its mercy disguised as exactness, remember that bowls and doors can teach a different courage? Will Mowgli, when his child asks for a story, tell of Bagheera's old price and Raksha's oath, and the night at Council Rock when a brand drew a small circle of fear that taught a larger circle of peace? And if he tells it, will he use our names as we use them, or the softer names that let children sleep? If you ask me what is true, I will show you paths. There is the one that runs from our cave to the lower pool, the one we wore into a proverb. There is the one that skirts the tamarind and pretends to forget the village until a human song remembers itself. There is the one that lifts to the ridge where Akela's shadow stands longest, when the moon is a thin tooth. And there is the path inside my ribs that loops through each of these and makes a den wherever belonging is asked to rest. Truth is a path you keep sweeping. We learn that from Messua's yard as much as from Council Rock. When the last hot month leaned on us and the jackals rehearsed their thin cleverness in the ravine, I climbed to the high stone where the air strips words of their vanity. The forest lay below like a creature deeply sure of itself. I thought of the odd set of lessons a single boy had dragged through our lives. That a name can be a house if spoken right. That praise is a net if you forget to look for knots. That a tool is a truth with a handle, and you must be certain which hand it trains. That bees will help if invited to dislike what you dislike, but will never work for your pride. I thought of a lame tiger whose patience taught us the price of standing poorly. Of red dogs who taught us the price of standing late. Of an old wolf who taught us how to stand at all. Toward evening, a small thing happened that made a large sense. A child in the village laughed 3 notes. Bright, unfinished, and somewhere nearer a wolf cub answered with a yip entirely his own. The sounds did not match. They did not need to. They overlapped for the length of a breath, and then each returned to its grammar. The jungle accepted the chord as if accepting weather. I went down to our den, and Raksha lifted her head, and father pretended he had never been asleep. We lay as families lie when the day has done no more harm than living requires. The air outside wore the least hint of kitchen smoke and the friendlier sweat of cattle. Bees filed their last reports. Stars pried themselves loose from habit. I placed my muzzle where a boy's hand had once rested and felt not heat, not ache, but the simple proof that what we guard guards us back. If you have come with me this far, keep one lesson warm and light enough to carry. We belong not because the law commands it, but because, again and again, we choose to be kept and to keep. A pack is a story told in 2 voices, mine, yours, and the pauses we respect between them. Some day you will stand at your own border, where leaf ends and grain begins, and you will hear a name call you forward while another name calls you home. Step with courtesy. Bow to both. And when you cannot bow to both, bow to the one that leaves a door open behind you. Listen, the night has softened its feet. The forest is awake and unafraid. Somewhere a boy carries water in careful hands. Somewhere a wolf teaches a cub the old words for enough. We will meet again at the turn where kindness waits, without insisting. Until then, walk gently, keep your fire in the right bowl, and let the law make a cradle, not a cage.